Have you ever been absolutely sure about something, only to look back years later and wonder, how could I have believed that? You were convinced, certain. You thought it was your idea, your emotion, your truth. And now, it looks more like a costume someone slipped onto your mind while you were asleep. This isn't just a story about mindset or beliefs or even psychology. This is about something far more hidden, far more powerful. There's a mechanism inside you right now, an invisible signal, constantly shaping how you see, feel, decide, react, and even how you define who you are. And it's doing all this without your permission. The thought you're not thinking is the one shaping your entire life, because that's how the signal works. It bypasses the conscious mind entirely. It's not what you're choosing. It's what's choosing for you. You think you're in charge. But look closely. Did you choose your beliefs? Or were they handed to you before you could even ask a question? Did you choose your fears? Or did they grow like mold in a dark room you never even walked into? Did you actually choose the person you've become? Or were you shaped by 1,000 silent nudges you never noticed? The signal is real. It operates beneath your awareness, quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. It is your first interpreter of reality. Before a single thought passes through your conscious awareness, this hidden layer has already filtered the meaning, assigned the emotion, and determined your response. And here's the catch. It doesn't care about what you want. It only cares about what you're wired to expect. It operates from programming you didn't install, from stories you didn't write, and from patterns you didn't choose. This is the signal that overrides your conscious intentions. You're about to uncover the system behind that signal. A system that operates like an invisible algorithm, feeding you reactions, beliefs, identities, all while convincing you they're your own. This isn't philosophy. This isn't theory. This is architecture, the mental blueprint running underneath your life. Across the next 50 chapters, we'll pull the curtain on how it works. You'll learn why your conscious thoughts barely touch the surface of your actual behavior, why your goals don't stick, why your relationships loop the same patterns, and why the more you try to fix yourself with logic, the deeper you get pulled into familiar emotional traps. But you won't just learn what's happening. You'll learn how to interrupt it, how to hear the thought beneath the thought, how to rewire the mental code and unlock a different signal, one aligned with the real you, the you that existed before the programming, before the loops, before the filter. You've never truly had a thought of your own, not yet, but you will. And once you do, the signal starts broadcasting from you. Now let's begin where all confusion starts, with the illusion that you're the one thinking your thoughts. You wake up, you stretch, you scroll, you feel irritated, or motivated, or anxious, and then you decide what kind of day it's going to be. You think it's your decision. You believe you're piloting your mind, but something deeper has already made that call. Here's the truth. Most of your thoughts are not decisions, they're reflexes, echoes, reactions, a mental mirage that makes you believe you're steering when really, you're just watching the wheel move under your hands. Start by observing your own thoughts, not analyzing, not fixing, just observing. You'll begin to notice something strange. They don't ask for your approval. They just show up. You don't ask to worry. You just start worrying. You don't ask to judge. The judgment just appears. You don't ask to remember that embarrassing moment from 10 years ago. It just barges in. So where are these thoughts coming from? Not from your logical mind, and certainly not from your conscious intentions. They arise from a system that has one goal: survival through familiarity. This system is automatic. It monitors everything: your environment, your body, your habits, your memories, and selects thoughts that match what it already expects to experience. Not what you want to experience, what it expects. And here's where it gets dangerous. When your brain expects rejection, it feeds you thoughts of doubt. When your brain expects failure, it feeds you thoughts of hesitation. When your brain expects chaos, it feeds you thoughts that create it. Not because you're broken, but because that signal is doing its job. Your thoughts aren't wrong. They're just old. They're built on yesterday's wiring, trying to keep you inside the walls of a mental map you never created, but have memorized so well you can no longer see it. This is the mental mirage, the illusion of thinking freely when your thoughts are actually cycling a closed loop of past experiences, inherited fears, outdated beliefs, and invisible scripts. Let's look at something you probably haven't questioned: your preferences. You think you like what you like, but preferences are trained. Repetition, reward, reinforcement. That's what builds the neural pathways you now call personality. Do you actually prefer silence? Or did growing up in chaos make it feel like safety? Do you actually hate attention? Or did early ridicule program your nervous system to associate visibility with pain? Do you actually trust your instincts? Or have you confused overthinking with intelligence? These aren't personal flaws. They're the residue of invisible patterns, patterns created long before you had the tools to see them. Your conscious mind is trying to make the best of a system it doesn't fully control. And that's the problem. You've been solving the wrong problem. You've been chasing the surface: productivity, mindset shifts, motivation, while the real issue sits beneath it, quietly puppeteering the show. You've been chasing better thoughts when you should have been questioning where they come from in the first place. Now that you've seen the mirage, now that you know the wheel in your hands isn't actually connected to the engine, the next step is to ask, who designed the road? Next, we will uncover the source of these thoughts, not just the surface-level ideas, but the machinery underneath that manufactures them. Because until you expose their origin, you'll keep thinking they're yours. And they're not. They never were. Now that you've seen the illusion, that your thoughts don't belong to you in the way you once believed, it's time to take things further. Because if your thoughts are not consciously chosen, the question becomes undeniable. Where are they coming from? There is a machine running underneath your awareness. It has one job: to keep you consistent with everything you've experienced, feared, believed, and repeated in the past. This machine doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care if you're growing. It only cares if you're predictable. This system is your subconscious mind. And it's not just a storage unit. It's the real architect of your inner experience. Most people think the subconscious is just a dumping ground for repressed memories or forgotten trauma. That's a mistake. It's far more active. It's not just hiding things, it's constructing the reality you live inside. It feeds your conscious mind with pre-approved thoughts. And those thoughts seem natural because they match your internal programming. Let's look at a simple example. You walk into a room and see someone glance at you, a neutral event. Your conscious mind interprets it as judgment. Why? Because your subconscious had already decided what that glance meant long before your reasoning could catch up. Maybe it fed you the thought, they think I look ridiculous. But that's not a thought, it's a projection. A direct output from years of stored social anxiety, childhood conditioning, moments you were laughed at, feelings you never processed. It's not the situation that shapes the thought. It's the meaning your subconscious attached to it years before today. You didn't choose that meaning. You didn't pause and evaluate options. The thought appeared fully formed, fast, automatic, emotionally charged. That's the signal at work. Now think about how many times this happens each day, each hour, every minute. Your thoughts are not spontaneous expressions of your current self. They are echoes from a blueprint designed long ago, often in environments where you had no control and little understanding. This is why you keep thinking the same way, why you rehearse the same inner dialogue, why you find yourself stuck in internal loops that feel deeply personal, but were installed by external circumstances. The origin of most thoughts can be traced back to three major sources. 1. Repetition. The brain loves what's familiar. It favors loops over innovation. So whatever thought got repeated the most, whether it was useful or not, became the default. 2. Emotional imprint. Thoughts that were born during intense emotional states get tagged as important. Your brain marks them for priority access. These are the thoughts that resurface under stress, not because they're helpful, but because they were recorded in high definition. 3. Environmental programming. Parents, teachers, media, culture. Every authority figure you encountered as a child contributed to the initial architecture of your mental environment. They modeled behaviors, repeated beliefs, assigned value to certain actions, and your subconscious took notes. None of this happened with your approval. It was absorbed, instantly, automatically, and because it was installed so early, it now feels like truth. But it's not truth, it's exposure. Let that land. Much of what you believe is not the result of investigation. It's the result of exposure. That's why trying to think new thoughts often doesn't work. The subconscious simply rejects them, not because they're wrong, but because they don't match the original blueprint. You can't think new thoughts while the architect of your mind is still protecting old foundations. So if your conscious thoughts are only the surface-level expressions of a deeper system, then the real question becomes, who built that system? Next, we will meet the hidden architect, the one writing your mental code without asking permission. And once you see who or what installed your inner programming, you'll finally understand why you've been stuck repeating thoughts you never actually chose. You've now traced the thread. Your thoughts aren't as independent as they appear. They're being produced by a system underneath, a subconscious factory of assumptions, emotions, and reactions that got built without your awareness. But it gets even deeper. That system was installed. Installed by people. Installed by culture. Installed by environments that had their own agendas, limitations, fears, and blind spots. And you absorbed it all, without questioning. Because that's what happens when the mind is young and wide open. In those early years, your subconscious is like wet cement. Every word, every look, every experience, it leaves a mark. And most of those marks harden into permanent code before you ever knew what they meant. This installer, this subconscious hacker, is not a single person. It's a network of influence that began before you could spell your own name. Let's name them. Family. They didn't just raise you. They encoded you. Their beliefs about love, fear, success, danger, those became your default filters. Not because they're true, but because they were first. Culture. Every society has its dogmas, its roles, the scripts. You were given a part to play in a story written by a system that values control more than authenticity. And you learned your lines perfectly. Trauma. Not always big, dramatic trauma. Sometimes it's subtle. Pattern of being ignored. A look of disapproval. 1,000 small moments that taught your subconscious what not to be, just to stay safe. This is how the hacker works. Quietly, early, repetitively. It doesn't need to use reason. It just needs to repeat. And once it's repeated enough, the thought becomes a law. A belief. A command line in your inner operating system. And then, without knowing it, you start building your life around those silent commands. Never speak up. Always be nice. You're not good enough. Trust is dangerous. People don't change. None of these are facts, but your subconscious treats them like instructions. And so your conscious mind aligns with them, crafting rationalizations, building habits, forming relationships, all around code you didn't write. You might say, well, I know better now. I've read the books. I've done the work. But the hacker is still running unless you rewrite the code. Information doesn't change programming. Pattern interrupts do. This is why self-help rarely sticks. You're trying to install new thoughts on top of old code. But the subconscious doesn't operate by logic. It operates by emotion, repetition, and identity. If the new thought doesn't match the old emotional blueprint, it gets rejected. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. This is why growth feels like war. You're not just upgrading ideas, you're threatening the entire security system built to keep you safe inside old identities. So who's really in control? The hacker, the installer, the invisible force behind your inner world. And now that you've seen how it works, the next move is to trace it back to the first time it embedded its code. To locate the first command, the foundational lie your subconscious accepted as reality before you ever had a chance to challenge it. Next, we will go to the root, the very first belief that set everything else into motion. You didn't choose it, but you've been living by it ever since. And once you see that lie for what it is, everything else begins to unravel. The code breaks, and real thinking begins. Now that you've seen the hacker, the installer of invisible thoughts. The one feeding your conscious mind with code you didn't approve. It's time to trace it to the origin point. Not your first memory. Not your first conscious decision. Earlier. Much earlier. This isn't about your earliest thought. It's about the first lie your system accepted as truth. The belief that entered your mental operating system so early, so subtly, that it formed the foundation of everything that came after. And here's what makes it so powerful. It didn't arrive with words. It arrived through feeling. You didn't understand language yet, but you felt rejection, or absence, or fear. And because your brain needed a reason, any reason, it manufactured one. That reason became your first identity. Maybe it sounded like this: I must be too much. I'm not enough. Love has to be earned. The world is unsafe. I need to perform to be accepted. My needs are a burden. You didn't speak these words, but the emotion wrapped around them hardwired the conclusion deep into your subconscious. And once the lie settled in, it didn't stay silent. It became a filter, a framework, a lens that colored everything else you experienced. Let's say you cried as a baby and no one came. That moment wasn't just a blank blip in time. Your body recorded it. Your nervous system filed it. And your subconscious drew a conclusion. Not consciously, not logically, automatically. The result? You internalized a message. I don't matter. Or maybe you were praised only when you excelled. Every mistake brought tension. Every success brought relief. The pattern? Performance equals love. So you became excellent at winning approval and a stranger to your own needs. This is the first lie, a distorted belief born from early survival. The subconscious isn't trying to punish you. It's trying to protect you. But it does so by anchoring to whatever kept you safe, even if that safety came at the cost of your authenticity. Now fast forward to today. You walk into a job interview, a date, a social setting. Something feels off. You overthink. You freeze. You smile too much. You shrink. You don't know why, but your subconscious does. It's following the rulebook written by that first lie. You can have a brilliant mind, powerful skills, real insight, but if the root code still says, I'm not enough, then every thought will bend to match that signal. That's why your affirmations fall flat. Why your plans get sabotaged. Why your progress stalls right before breakthrough. Because your mind isn't fighting logic. It's defending a belief formed when you couldn't defend yourself. The worst part? Most people never question it. They never go back to the root. They try to fix the symptoms. Self-doubt, fear, procrastination, emotional disconnection, without ever realizing these are just branches of the same poisonous root. And this lie, it's not singular. It spreads. It evolves. It replicates itself through new situations that appear different but always feel strangely familiar. Different people. Same emotional script. Once you identify the root lie, something critical happens. The rest of the code starts to reveal itself. You begin to hear your thoughts with a new filter. You no longer ask, why do I feel this way? You ask, who taught me to feel this way? That shift changes everything. So how do you locate your first lie? You don't need perfect memory. You need emotional honesty. Ask yourself this. What feeling keeps showing up in your hardest moments? Is it guilt? Shame? Fear of rejection? The need to prove something? Now trace it backward. When was the first time you felt that feeling? Go even earlier. You'll find it. Or more accurately, you'll feel it. That first false message has a signature. And it never really leaves until it's confronted. Once that original belief is exposed, your mind has two options. Protect it or rewire it. Protecting it means continuing to perform, please, avoid, chase, or numb. Rewiring it means facing it, updating it, replacing it. And that takes conscious intervention. This is the first break in the cycle. And now that you've traced the original code back to its first lie, it's time to ask the bigger question. Are you even capable of choosing, in a world where your choices have been pre-filtered by a system designed to keep you safe, not sovereign? Next, we will challenge the myth that you've been choosing all along, and uncover whether your so-called free will is actually anything more than a pre-written script. Now that you've uncovered the first lie, the one that shaped your identity before you even had language, it's time to confront the next illusion. The idea that you are consciously choosing your life. Free will is the sacred foundation of individualism, choice, control. But is it real? Or is it just the user interface of a program that's already running? Let's examine what choice really means. Every decision you make is filtered through your beliefs. Your beliefs were shaped by your early emotional blueprint. And that blueprint was installed before you had the tools to evaluate it. So when you choose, what are you actually choosing? Are you acting from free will? Or are you reacting to internal programming? You may choose what job to take, what partner to pursue, what words to say. But if the motivation underneath those choices is fear, shame, unworthiness, or people-pleasing, that's not freedom. That's reflex. Let's make this clear. Free will, in its purest form, means acting from conscious alignment, not emotional conditioning. And most people are not doing that. They're living on autopilot, powered by thoughts they didn't choose, beliefs they didn't build, and fears they never questioned. You choose to avoid confrontation, not because it's wise, but because your system still associates speaking up with punishment. You choose to work hard not from inspiration, but because approval feels like oxygen. You choose to stay small, not because you lack ambition, but because visibility still triggers shame from a classroom decades ago. Every one of these is a survival strategy masquerading as a decision. That's not to say you don't have agency. You do, but only to the extent that you've reclaimed authorship over your internal programming. Until then, your mind is acting out a script written by your environment, your past, your fear, and enforced by repetition. Let's go deeper. There's a part of the brain known as the default mode network. Its job? To run predictive simulations, manage identity, and keep your experience consistent. It's always referencing the past to project the future, and it resists anything unfamiliar, even if it's better. That's your subconscious code defending itself. And when it's active, your choices are just pre-recorded loops. This is why you find yourself doing things you swore you wouldn't do again. This is why you fall into the same emotional holes, even when you see them coming. This is why breaking patterns feels like betrayal, because your system views change as a threat. Free will isn't pressing a button. It's writing the code that installs the button in the first place. And until you do that, until you become the observer and the editor of your internal programming, you are not choosing. You're performing, reacting, repeating. True choice only begins after awareness. Only after you stop, pause, examine, and ask, is this action serving who I want to become, or who I was trained to be? This awareness is rare. It's uncomfortable, and it changes everything. Because once you see the programming, you can no longer pretend you're acting freely. And here's the good news. Once you see that your decisions have been filtered, you also gain the power to change the filter. That's where real choice begins. Next, we will expose the most seductive form of false clarity, emotion, and how feelings, when left unexamined, disguise themselves as truth, guiding your choices while bypassing your awareness entirely. You've now seen how the illusion of free will is built on top of programmed choices. But there's another level of deception, more subtle, more seductive. It's the one that says, if I feel it, it must be true. Emotion is powerful. It speaks louder than logic. It shows up instantly, and it feels real. So real, in fact, that most people never stop to ask where it came from. They just obey it. But here's the hidden trap. Not all emotion is based in present reality. In fact, most of it isn't. It's recycled. It's reactive. It's triggered by memories your conscious mind can't even see. But your nervous system never forgot. Let's break this down. You enter a new relationship. Everything seems fine. But one day, your partner takes a little longer to respond. Without warning, a wave of anxiety floods your system. Not a small twinge. A full emotional hit. The kind that makes you want to pull back, overanalyze, protect yourself. Your mind rushes in with explanations. They must be losing interest. Or, I knew this wouldn't last. But stop. Did that anxiety come from what just happened? Or did it come from everything you believed was happening, based on a past wound? This is the emotion trap. It convinces you that your current feelings are evidence of truth, when really, they're echoes of your oldest pain. Here's how the trap works. First, the body detects a familiar sensation: silence, distance, criticism, uncertainty. Then, the subconscious scans for previous times that sensation occurred. Next, it triggers an emotion based on past interpretations: fear, anger, rejection, abandonment. Finally, the conscious mind scrambles to justify that emotion with a new story. But that story isn't truth. It's a defense mechanism trying to explain why you suddenly feel like a version of yourself from 15 years ago. The body remembers before the brain does. That's why emotion shows up so quickly. It's stored in muscle, in posture, in breath. It's not just psychological, it's physiological. And because it feels immediate, it fools you into thinking it's connected to the present. But feeling something doesn't prove anything, except that a familiar pattern just got activated. That distinction is everything. You can feel abandoned without actually being abandoned. You can feel unsafe without being in danger. You can feel unworthy without it being remotely true. But if you mistake those emotions as evidence, you begin shaping your actions and your identity around illusions. This is where most people stay stuck. They live in emotional reactions. They shape their entire worldview around what they feel. And the more emotionally reactive they are, the more confident they feel in their interpretation. It becomes a closed loop. I feel it, therefore it's true, therefore I act on it, which reinforces the original belief. And once the loop is active, the brain starts filtering out anything that contradicts the emotion. So if you feel unlovable, you'll ignore the compliments. You'll mistrust the praise. You'll fixate on neutral moments and twist them into evidence. Not because you're weak, but because your brain has a mission: preserve the emotional pattern that feels most familiar. This is how emotional loyalty traps you. Your body and mind work together to protect the emotional code, even if that code is based on falsehood. Now here's the dangerous part. You don't just believe your emotions. You identify with them. You say, I am anxious. I am angry. I am sad. But you're not. Those are just states passing through your system. They are not you. The moment you fuse with an emotion, it becomes your identity. And that's when the trap becomes a prison. So how do you break it? By learning to observe emotions, not obey them. By recognizing their origin without assuming they speak for your current reality. By pausing when the emotional surge hits and asking, is this emotion coming from this moment, or is it borrowing energy from the past? That question alone can interrupt the loop. Because here's the truth. Feelings are valid, but they are not always accurate. They are messengers, not commands. Your job is not to suppress them, it's to decode them. Now that you understand how emotion manipulates perception, the next step is to examine the internal voice that narrates your experience. The one that sounds like you, but isn't actually you. Next, we will confront the familiar voice in your head that has been masquerading as your inner self, shaping your thoughts and reactions from behind a mask, and reveal who it really serves. You've just learned how emotions deceive by appearing like truth. But there's a second, even more insidious actor in this mental performance. One that uses emotion as fuel. It's the voice inside your head. The one that narrates your life, critiques your actions, predicts your failures, rehearses your fears. You've heard it your entire life. But here's the unsettling reality. That voice isn't your authentic self. It just sounds like it is. This voice is the perfect imitator. It mimics your tone, uses your vocabulary, even taps into your memories. But it doesn't come from the part of you that wants growth, expansion, or joy. It comes from the part of you that wants control. And control is always born from fear. Let's look closer. You try something new, that voice jumps in. You'll fail. People will judge you. You're not ready. You make a mistake. The voice sharpens. You always do this. Why did you even try? You get praised, it twists the praise. They don't really mean it. Don't get too comfortable. Sound familiar? That's not awareness. That's programming. That voice is the subconscious trying to maintain the old narrative. The one built on your first lie. The one that sees every opportunity as a threat to your emotional homeostasis. So it talks. Loudly. Constantly. Persuasively. And because it speaks in your voice, you believe it. But listen closely and you'll notice something. That voice has only one job. Keep you in familiar emotional territory. Even if that territory is miserable, small, or stagnant. Because the familiar feels safer to the nervous system than the unknown. And so the voice speaks from your past, not your potential. It speaks from your fear, not your truth. Here's the test. When you hear that voice, ask, whose job is this thought serving? If the answer is safety, control, avoidance, protection, then you're not listening to your higher self. You're listening to the inner actor hired by your subconscious to maintain the old script. It doesn't hate you, thinks it's helping, but help that keeps you small isn't help. It's a leash. The most dangerous part of this voice is that it blends with your identity. It sounds like reason. It feels like intuition. It talks in I statements. I can't do this. I'm not ready. I always mess it up. I don't belong here. But here's the shift. When you learn to separate from that voice, to hear it without fusing with it, you gain power. Real power. The power to choose your own narrative. The power to override the old signal. The power to think thoughts that aren't just recycled fears wearing your voice. That's when things start changing fast. Not because your outer world suddenly shifts, but because the volume of that voice begins to drop. And something else begins to rise. The quieter, truer guidance that's been there all along. Next, we will look at how that deceptive voice doesn't just speak. It filters your entire reality. You've been seeing life through its lens. Now it's time to take that lens off and see the world as it actually is. You've now heard the voice that speaks like you but doesn't come from you. And once that voice has your trust, it does more than just talk. It shapes how you see. That's the next layer of the invisible signal perception manipulation. This part doesn't speak in words. It doesn't use emotion. It uses filters. Not metaphorical ones. Neurological ones. Your reality is being altered before it even reaches your conscious awareness. Right now, you believe you're looking at the world. But you're not. You're looking at a filtered, edited, selectively cropped version of the world. One that's been processed through your subconscious before your eyes ever had a say. Let's be precise. Your brain receives millions of bits of data per second. Sounds, colors, movements, energies, sensory input from your environment. But your conscious mind can only handle a tiny fraction of that. So what happens to the rest? It's discarded, filtered out by your reticular activating system, RAS, and other neural networks trained by your beliefs. Think of your perception like a custom search algorithm. If you believe something deeply, even unconsciously, your brain will highlight anything that proves it true and delete anything that contradicts it. It doesn't do this to hurt you. It does it to protect mental efficiency. But what it protects ends up becoming your reality. Here's how the unseen hand works. If your subconscious holds the belief, I am not respected, it will delete signs of admiration, spotlight dismissive body language, magnify small slights, and reinforce that narrative every time. You won't even notice the compliments. You'll obsess over the one person who didn't say hello. This isn't a mood problem. This is perception hijacking. You're not seeing the world. You're seeing your programming reflected back at you. And because it feels real, you treat it as truth. But it's not truth. It's confirmation bias hard-coded into your nervous system. This is why people stay stuck. Not because they're weak or undisciplined, but because they're interpreting life through a lens that reinforces their deepest inherited beliefs. And they don't even know they're wearing that lens. You may say, but I'm trying to be positive. I'm thinking better thoughts. I'm doing the work. And yet, your perception still clings to the old pattern. Why? Because your thoughts don't control your filter. Your programming does. And unless you adjust the filter at the level of belief and identity, you'll keep seeing the same distorted world, no matter how much positivity you try to force on top of it. This explains why two people can live the same event and walk away with completely different memories. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. One sees challenge, the other sees attack. One sees growth, the other sees failure. Same reality, different filters. This is the unseen hand at work. It edits reality, not in obvious ways but in the subtlest ones. Through the tone of voice you notice, the moment you zoom in on, the signs your body reacts to, and the danger, you'll fight to defend what you think is real, even if it's just a filtered lie. So how do you begin to break the grip of the unseen hand? By pausing, by catching yourself in perception, not just in thought. When something triggers you, don't just ask, "What am I thinking?" Ask, "What am I seeing? And what might I be missing?" That single question opens a crack in the lens. Because awareness isn't just about thoughts. It's about recognizing that you're interpreting every moment through a mental frame you didn't consciously build. And once you see the frame, you can start questioning what it's letting in and what it's keeping out. Next, we will expose the mechanics of that filter and show why you literally can't see most of what's in front of you. Your mind is deleting almost everything, and it's doing it for one reason: to keep you aligned with your internal story. Now that you understand how the unseen hand curates your reality, let's go further. It's not just shaping what you notice. It's erasing everything that contradicts your inner blueprint. Yes, erasing, not ignoring, not minimizing, deleting. Let's start with a cold fact. Your senses take in more than your brain can handle. So your mind evolved to act as a deletion machine. Its job is to remove everything that doesn't match the identity and belief system stored in your subconscious. Think of it like this. Your mind is an editor. Reality is the raw footage, but the editor only includes scenes that support the existing storyline. And anything that doesn't fit the plot, it hits the cutting room floor without ever reaching your conscious awareness. So if your internal narrative is, "I'm not interesting," you will subconsciously overlook the people intrigued by you. You'll feel bored in conversations. You'll struggle to engage. And you'll walk away thinking, "See, I really am boring." When in truth, your brain simply deleted the cues that contradicted the story. Let that sink in. Most of your evidence is self-selected. You're not collecting facts. You're collecting proof. Proof that the identity you've accepted is still true. This is why new experiences rarely stick. Even if something positive happens, a compliment, a breakthrough, a moment of connection, your brain doesn't retain it unless it aligns with the filter. It's like trying to install a new app on an outdated operating system. The system crashes. The app never runs. And so, back to the old loop, the old story, the old self, because that's what the filter allows in. Now ask yourself, how many moments of peace have you ignored because your mind only knows chaos? How many opportunities have you overlooked because your filter only sees threat? How many connections have you missed because your perception only highlights distance? This is not about blame. It's about awareness. Because once you know the filter exists, you stop treating your perceptions like truth and start treating them like programming. So how do you interrupt the filter? You challenge what you're not seeing. When you feel triggered, unworthy, or stuck, ask, what would someone with the opposite belief notice right now? Would they see support instead of rejection? Would they see potential instead of threat? Would they see safety instead of danger? That question bypasses your usual deletion protocol and forces your system to consider new data. That's how you start teaching your brain to upgrade the operating system. Not through force, through inquiry. The goal isn't to change your thoughts. The goal is to expand what your mind allows you to see. Because new perception leads to new emotion, and new emotion becomes the foundation for new thinking. Most people never get there. They keep trying to feel better inside the same mental cage, unaware that the cage is built from what their brain refuses to notice. But you don't have to stay there. You've now seen the filter. And once it's visible, it becomes changeable. Next, we will expose just how much your brain is deleting every second, and why 99% of reality is never even reaching you. You think you're missing something? You're right. You're missing nearly everything. By now, you've seen the filter that reshapes your perception. But what you haven't fully grasped yet is just how much that filter removes. The actual scale of what you're missing isn't abstract. It's measurable, and it's staggering. Let's get to the raw numbers. Every second, your senses process over 11 million bits of data. Your conscious awareness can handle about 50. Let that settle in. Out of 11 million possible data points, your conscious mind gets a curated package of 50. That means your internal system is deleting over 99.9995% of the available information every second. This isn't a glitch. This is efficiency. Your subconscious edits your reality before you ever experience it, and it does so with brutal precision. But here's the key. What gets deleted isn't random. It's determined by your mental conditioning. Your beliefs, expectations, and emotional history work like a filtering algorithm. They tell your system what to keep and what to ignore. So when you say, "That's just how life is," you're not describing reality. You're describing what your brain allows you to perceive. This is why it can feel like life keeps repeating itself. It's not just that your habits are cyclical. Your entire field of awareness is being tailored to serve your internal narrative. Every deleted piece of information is a missed possibility, connection you didn't see, a solution that passed you by, an insight that didn't fit the story you're used to telling yourself. The longer your system has operated under the same narrative, the more aggressively it protects that reality. It's not resisting change because change is bad. It's resisting change because change requires noticing something your system is trained to ignore. Let's use a real-world mental example. Someone who believes people can't be trusted walks into a room. Out of 20 people, 18 show warmth, openness, and connection. But one person looks away. Guess which one the brain zooms in on? Guess which one gets remembered? Guess what confirms the belief? The 18 signals of safety are deleted. The one sign of potential rejection is highlighted. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. This isn't just about people. It happens with opportunity, with feedback, with emotion, with your own ideas. If something doesn't match the internal script, it gets erased. You don't even realize it was there. And that's the real trap. The system doesn't let you know what it's hiding from you. You live in an edited world, and you think it's the full picture. But the truth is, every version of reality is custom designed by the internal parameters you've never seen. And if you don't update those parameters, no amount of thinking, wishing, journaling, or intention setting will touch the deeper issue. Because you're only playing with the 50 bits your mind allowed you to see, while the other 10,999,950 fly right past your awareness. So here's the question. What's hiding in that missing 99%? Not just more data, more possibility. Possibility for different behavior. Possibility for new connection. Possibility for unseen strength. But that possibility only becomes accessible when you interrupt the deletion system. And that begins with active disruption of the internal patterns responsible for telling your mind what to filter. You've spent years teaching your brain what to ignore. It learned from your experiences, your pain, your fear, your family. And it's still operating on those lessons. Even if your life has changed. Even if you've changed. Your subconscious still treats that original code as law. This is why so many people feel stuck even when their circumstances improve. Because their awareness hasn't caught up. They're still seeing life through yesterday's lens. So what do you do now? You start updating the system. You become more suspicious of your first interpretation. You stop assuming that what you're noticing is all that exists. And you learn to ask new questions when old patterns activate. What else could be true here? What might I be missing right now? If I were operating from a different identity, what would I notice instead? Those questions reopen the gate. They tell your filter, this input doesn't match the old story, but I want to see it anyway. And over time, your brain learns to expand what it lets in. This is not about forcing positivity or delusion. It's about reclaiming access to the parts of reality your system has been editing out. Because real transformation isn't about changing your life. It's about seeing the life that's already here, the parts you've been blind to. Next, we will examine why certain patterns, people, and problems seem to follow you, no matter how hard you try to escape them. You'll see that what's repeating isn't coincidence. It's programming. And the same scenes are showing up because your mental algorithm is addicted to familiarity. You now know your mind deletes nearly everything outside its trained focus. But there's a second piece that completes the cycle. Your brain doesn't just delete what's unfamiliar. It recycles what's familiar. This is the mechanism behind repetition. The patterns you see in relationships, careers, emotions, behaviors, the loops you can't seem to escape, they're not random. They're algorithmic. Your subconscious uses pattern recognition as a shortcut. It notices what has happened before. It assumes it will happen again. And then it positions you to react as if it already is. You're not just reliving experiences. You're pre-living them before they even happen. And in doing so, you bring them to life. Let's take an example. You believe people always leave. This happened before. The wound was real. Now that belief becomes part of your mental code. Your subconscious flags any sign of distance, delay, or hesitation as abandonment. Your body tenses. Your tone changes. Your fear rises. Your energy shifts. And the other person, unconsciously responding to your tension, begins to pull away. You don't just notice the pattern. You help fulfill it. This is how the algorithm maintains control. It feeds you familiar scenes. Not because they're right, but because they're predictable. Your brain favors certainty over accuracy. Even if the outcome is painful, your system would rather repeat what it knows than risk something it can't anticipate. So it creates emotional déjà vu. Different people, different context, same internal conclusion, over and over and over. This is why it feels like certain struggles have followed you your whole life. They're not following you. You're projecting them through an algorithm that only sees what matches the original wound. Your mind is a pattern matching machine. And once it finds a pattern that confirms your identity, it locks on. You don't just believe in the pattern. You become part of it. Here's where it gets more complex. The pattern starts working like gravity, pulling you into familiar thoughts, familiar reactions, familiar conclusions. Even if the surface changes, a new job, a new partner, a new location, the same energetic blueprint activates the same response cycle. And it feels like destiny, but it's not. It's momentum. So how do you interrupt the mental algorithm? You disrupt the loop. And that begins by catching the pattern as it starts, not after it's already taken over. The earlier you catch it, the more leverage you have. You feel the same emotion rise? Pause. You notice your voice harden? Pause. You sense a familiar frustration coming online? Pause. That pause is not passive. It's the most powerful move you can make. It stops the algorithm before it completes the loop. And when the loop is interrupted, your mind starts scanning for new possibilities, new inputs, new responses, new outcomes. This is how transformation begins. Not by waiting for new circumstances, but by breaking the internal code that keeps recreating the old ones. Next, we will reveal how your unconscious patterns aren't just attracting familiar experiences. They're shaping outcomes without your awareness. You'll see how the very thoughts you're not thinking are pulling events, people, and choices into alignment with your unspoken beliefs. You now understand how internal algorithms repeat the same emotional scenes, even when the players change. But the implications run even deeper. It's not just that you notice the same patterns. You attract them. Not because of magic, because of structure. Your unconscious mind, the part you rarely hear but always obey, sends out a constant signal. That signal doesn't attract what you consciously want. It attracts what you subconsciously expect. This is the reverse law of attraction. It's not your intentions shaping your life. It's your unspoken assumptions, the ones buried underneath your personality, behind your behaviors, beneath your goals. Let's get clear. If your internal signal says, abandonment is inevitable, you'll subconsciously gravitate toward people who are inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or chaotic. If your internal signal says, I am invisible, you'll find yourself in environments that overlook your value, while amplifying everyone else's. If your internal signal says, success requires suffering, you'll unconsciously sabotage ease and amplify pressure, because comfort will feel unsafe. None of this is about conscious choice. It's about energetic familiarity. People often say, I just keep attracting the wrong people, or why do the same opportunities keep slipping away, or why does everything get harder the closer I get to breakthrough? It's not luck, and it's not fate. It's alignment, just not the kind you think. You're aligned perfectly with the signal you've been broadcasting below awareness. And that signal is not in your words. It's in your emotional set point. Think of it like a radio tower. If you're set to a station called Unworthiness FM, you can't receive Confidence 101. You can try. You can scream affirmations. You can visualize. But if your signal says, I don't deserve it, your environment responds accordingly. That's not the universe punishing you. That's your energy field pulling in circumstances that validate what your nervous system expects. The attraction happens on a vibrational level, through tone, presence, body language, choices, micro-decisions. It's not conscious, but it's powerful. You'll say yes to what matches your signal. You'll ignore what doesn't. And the life that unfolds will appear like it's happening to you. But it's happening through you. Now think about what this means. Every time you felt stuck, unable to break the pattern, it wasn't because your intentions were weak. It was because your unconscious attraction pattern was strong. Too strong to be overridden by conscious desire alone. So how do you change what you attract? Not by forcing outcomes, but by changing the signal you're emitting. And that starts by raising awareness of what you're aligned with emotionally, not intellectually. Ask yourself, what does my life consistently reflect back to me? What types of people do I repeatedly allow into my space? What outcomes do I seem to accidentally create over and over? Then go deeper. What belief must I be holding for this to keep showing up? What feeling am I used to, even if I say I don't want it? That's the pattern. That's the signal. And until it's shifted, your attraction point stays locked. This is why surface-level change is so exhausting. You try to think new thoughts while carrying the old frequency. You try to upgrade your goals without updating your energetic settings. You want different results while broadcasting the same emotional command. But now you know the pattern isn't external. It's internal. And here's where it gets critical. You cannot think your way out of a signal you haven't reprogrammed. That's exactly what we're going to confront next, the failure of thought alone to create change. And the real reason thinking harder never works. You've now uncovered the invisible signal shaping what you attract, not by desire, but by unconscious familiarity. And maybe you've noticed something else by now. You've tried to change before. You've made plans, set goals, visualized success, and yet, the results didn't stick. The question is why? The answer, you were trying to outthink a system that doesn't operate on thought. Let's call it what it is, the thought vacuum. This is the zone where thinking louder, faster, and harder actually reinforces the very patterns you're trying to break. Because the system you're fighting doesn't respond to logic. It responds to state. Your subconscious, the true architect of your reality, is emotionally encoded. It doesn't care what you think. It cares what you feel. It doesn't evaluate arguments. It tracks patterns. So when you try to think your way out of fear while still feeling afraid, you're sending mixed signals. The conscious mind says, I am confident. The subconscious replies, no, you're not. I've seen your patterns. I have the receipts. Guess who wins? The one that runs 95% of your mental operations. The thought vacuum exists because your conscious mind is not built for override. It's built for storytelling, for justifying what the subconscious has already decided. That's why you keep ending up in the same loops, no matter how good your ideas are. This is why so many people get trapped in self-development burnout. They consume more, learn more, think more, and feel like they're growing. But underneath, they're still running on the same nervous system imprint, still reacting to the same triggers, still chasing the same unhealed outcomes. Information doesn't equal transformation, because change doesn't start in the intellect. It starts in the signal source. You can't override fear while your body is still wired for vigilance. You can't install new beliefs while your identity is anchored in the old. You can't shift behavior until your state gives the brain new emotional reference points. That's the key. State leads. Thought follows. If your state doesn't change, your thoughts are just noise bouncing off the walls of an unchanged system. So what actually creates transformation? You have to interrupt the signal at the somatic level, the level where identity, emotion, memory, and safety live. That means creating new emotional experiences so the nervous system has something different to anchor to. It means disrupting the automatic scripts long enough for a new pattern to get in. And it means recognizing that insight alone is not enough. You don't need better thoughts. You need a new baseline. Until your body believes it's safe to be in a different state, no amount of thinking will make it so. Let's illustrate this simply. You want to feel confident. You read the books. You tell yourself you're ready. But underneath, your nervous system is still coded to equate confidence with danger, visibility, exposure, vulnerability. So every time you try to act confidently, your body tenses. You sabotage the moment. You shrink. You recoil. Why? Because thought tried to outrun a pattern it never rewired. The vacuum pulls the thought back into the old frequency, and the pattern repeats. This is not a failure of willpower. It's the system doing what it was trained to do. And now that you understand that, you can stop trying to fight your way out with thought. You can learn to disrupt the signal at the level where it actually begins. Next, we will explore how the very concept of intention gets hijacked by the old programming, and why your efforts to move forward often collapse under the invisible weight of unaligned energy. You now understand why thought alone can't break old patterns. You've seen how the system that governs your behavior isn't convinced by ideas. It's influenced by emotional familiarity. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern self-development: intention. People are told, set clear intentions, hold the vision, focus on what you want. But here's the part nobody mentions. Your subconscious doesn't respond to your intentions. It responds to your signal. And your signal is not made of words. It's made of alignment, emotional, energetic, nervous system level alignment. So when you set an intention that contradicts your internal wiring, something strange happens. It gets hijacked. Not by sabotage, not by bad luck, by incongruence. Let's say you set the intention, I will attract healthy love, but your subconscious is still wired to believe that love equals abandonment. What do you think happens? You'll find yourself drawn to people who can't stay, repelled by people who feel safe, second-guessing your needs, overperforming to maintain connection. Why? Because the intention is logical, but the system is emotional. And the emotional programming always wins. This is why so many people say, I want this, and yet everything they do contradicts that desire. It's not self-sabotage. It's a misalignment between the signal you're sending and the story you're telling. Intentions without energetic alignment are like GPS coordinates without a vehicle. The destination exists, but you're not moving toward it. Now let's look at the mechanics of how intentions get hijacked. When you declare a new outcome, your subconscious scans it against existing identity patterns. If the new outcome threatens the emotional safety of your current identity, your nervous system marks it as a risk, not a goal, a threat. And the moment something is coded as a threat, your body goes into resistance, procrastination, confusion, distraction, fatigue. Not because you're lazy, but because the intention was never accepted by the deeper system. Here's what nobody tells you. You can only attract what you feel safe receiving, not what you want to receive. what your system has been trained to tolerate. If your body is wired for disappointment, your mind will try to compensate with motivation, but the system will quietly block all movement toward joy. If your body is wired for chaos, your mind will create order, but you'll keep generating situations that feel unstable. Why? Because the nervous system always chooses familiarity over alignment. So how do you stop your intentions from being hijacked? You stop focusing on the intention and start focusing on the internal safety required to sustain it. Instead of asking, "What do I want to manifest?" you ask, "What would it actually feel like to allow this into my life? And what part of me still believes that's unsafe?" That's where the friction lives. That's the resistance hiding behind your best intentions. Once you find that edge, that part of you that feels exposed, unworthy, unprepared, you meet it, not with more affirmations, with presence, with awareness, with real-time recalibration of your emotional capacity. Because your nervous system is the gatekeeper, and it doesn't respond to thought. It responds to consistency of experience. That's what builds trust. That's what updates the pattern. That's what allows intention to become reality, not through force, but through coherence. The truth is, you don't attract what you say. You attract what your system is able to hold. And if your intention doesn't match your internal safety map, it will never arrive. Or if it does, it won't stay. Next, we will explore what you actually broadcast into the world each day. Not through words or thoughts, but through emotional frequency. We'll uncover what others are sensing, even when you say nothing at all. You've now seen how intention gets overridden by subconscious misalignment. You've realized that it's not what you want that dictates your life. It's what your system feels safe allowing in. But here's what's even more powerful, and often more unsettling. You're broadcasting that alignment at all times. Not through words, not through actions, through emotional frequency. Think of it like this. Every human carries a signature, an emotional tone. Subtle, consistent, and deeply readable, even if it's never spoken. This signature is what people respond to, often unconsciously. It tells others whether you're safe, grounded, confident, needy, defensive, open, or guarded, without a single word. You've felt this before. You've walked into a room and sensed tension before anyone said a word. You've met someone and instantly felt trust or discomfort. You've heard someone speak confidently, but knew they were insecure. That's emotional signature. It's the frequency behind the words. And yours is broadcasting right now. The question is, what is it saying? To decode this, you don't look at your self-image. You don't ask what you believe you're showing. You look at your emotional baseline, the state you return to most often when you're not performing. For some, it's low-level anxiety. For others, defensiveness, or pressure, or guilt, or emotional exhaustion masked as detachment. Whatever that default is, that's your broadcast. Not your social mask, not your public behavior, your core emotional tone. And that tone speaks louder than anything you could say or do. This is why some people, no matter how polished their language, seem to repel opportunity. And why others, even when they say little, create presence and gravity in every room they enter. It's not charisma. It's not magnetism. It's energetic coherence. They are aligned within, and that alignment creates clarity without. Your emotional signature is the output of your internal system. It's built from unresolved emotional patterns, habitual thought loops, nervous system conditioning, identity-level beliefs. You can't fake it. You can't bypass it, but you can shift it. And the shift begins not by trying to appear different, but by becoming internally different. Because people don't respond to what you intend. They respond to what your body communicates through presence. Let's get practical. Start noticing the energy you bring into neutral spaces. The conversations where you're not trying to impress. The way your body feels when you're alone. That's the signature. It's not something you manufacture. It's something you allow. And when it's rooted in unresolved fear or hypervigilance, that's what leaks through. No matter how carefully you script your behavior. Now here's what's fascinating. When your signature starts to shift, your environment reacts. Suddenly people respond differently. Conflict patterns soften. You get approached instead of overlooked. Opportunities show up that match the new frequency. Why? Because your signal changed. You didn't try harder. You aligned deeper. You became the kind of presence that doesn't chase, doesn't perform, doesn't collapse under pressure. And that kind of presence is rare. Can't be copied. It must be cultivated. This is what people sense, far beyond your words. And once you become aware of it, you gain control over what you're actually contributing to every interaction, moment by moment. Next, we will go even deeper into that frequency and explore how beneath your emotional signature, there is a signal even more powerful, more primal, and more consistent. A signal that others feel before you say anything at all. You've now seen how your emotional signature broadcasts a signal, one that's deeply felt by those around you, regardless of what you say or do. But there's a layer beneath even that. There is a deeper signal, quieter, more stable, less reactive. It's not made of words. It's not made of emotion. It's made of energy. And this is the signal that truly governs how your reality responds to you. Let's clarify something right away. You don't have to believe in energy for it to shape your life. You're already using it. You're already reading it. And you're already being shaped by it constantly. Have you ever been in a room and suddenly felt uneasy, even though nothing was happening? Have you ever walked past a stranger and felt drawn to them, without a single exchange? Have you ever heard someone speak confidently, and yet sensed an inner collapse behind their tone? You weren't guessing. You were reading energy. Every human emits it, and it's not mystical. It's biological, neurological, and deeply felt. Your nervous system is a sensory antenna. It constantly scans for energetic consistency, and it responds not to words but to alignment. Here's what that means. When your inner world and your outer presence are aligned, you emit coherence. When there's contradiction between your emotional truth and your presentation, you emit confusion. And when your system is saturated in unhealed tension, you emit static. That static is what people pick up on. This is why someone can be nice but feel off. This is why certain people command attention without speaking. This is why some interactions feel nourishing, and others leave you drained. The words don't explain it. The energy does. And here's what's crucial. The world doesn't respond to your energy because it's judging you. It responds because it's designed to mirror back your frequency. So when you carry the frequency of guilt, life delivers situations that validate guilt. When you carry the frequency of collapse, life sends you pressure. When you carry the frequency of avoidance, life surrounds you with triggers, not to punish you but to reflect you. This is not a law of attraction fantasy. It's energetic physics. What you radiate becomes your point of contact with reality. And no matter how much you speak, plan, or affirm, the body speaks louder. Let's go deeper. Most people walk through life completely unaware of their signal. They focus on behavior, performance, delivery. But the real impact of your presence happens before you say anything. It's in your tone, your breath, your pacing, your tension, your stillness. It's what you carry into the room, not what you do in it. And the most magnetic people aren't the loudest. They're the most internally congruent. That congruence is felt, creates trust, resonance, respect, safety, because it says, this person is whole in themselves. So how do you change the signal? You stop managing your image and start regulating your system. You stop fixing your thoughts and start noticing your energy. And that starts with one critical move, tuning in. Pause right now and ask, is my energy grounded or scattered? Is my body open or armored? Am I rushing, resisting, bracing, or hiding? This isn't a mental evaluation. It's a somatic check-in. Your body always tells the truth. And the energy you emit begins where your body holds or releases pressure. If your energy is broadcasting dissonance, people won't say it out loud, but they'll feel it, and you'll wonder why the room feels distant. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your system was emitting a signal that said, I'm not here fully. And when you are here fully, something shifts. You stop chasing validation. You stop protecting yourself from imaginary threats. You stop folding under pressure because pressure no longer threatens your identity. You become the signal. And others feel that before you say a word. Next, we will examine how this signal doesn't just affect people. It shapes environments. The world around you is constantly responding to the frequency beneath your awareness. You're not just influencing others, you're influencing the entire field around you. Now that you understand your deeper energetic signal, the one that lives below words and emotions, you need to know this. It's not just people who respond to it. Your environment does too. This is the part most people never notice. You walk into a space. Your system emits a signal based on belief, safety, readiness, expectation. And the room, situation, or system begins to align with your broadcast. Energy doesn't stop at the skin. It shapes the field. Let's make this real. Have you ever walked into a new opportunity and felt immediately overlooked? Have you ever tried to pitch something and felt the room disengage before you finished your sentence? Or have you ever walked into a moment where everything flowed? Timing, support, synchronicity, and you didn't even try? These aren't accidents. They're environmental reflections. The field feels you. It adjusts to your internal coherence or dissonance, and it follows the tone you carry. This is especially true in group dynamics, meetings, teams, partnerships. If your internal broadcast says, I'm not valuable, the field contracts around you. I don't belong here. The field reflects disconnection. I'm here with nothing to prove. The field opens to you. This isn't magic. It's resonance. Humans are entrained to group energy, and the group energy is shaped by the most stable frequency present. If yours is fragmented, you get absorbed by the dominant energy in the room. But if yours is coherent, you become the anchor others calibrate to, even if they don't know why. This is why personal development matters, not just for your inner peace, but for your outer influence. Your beliefs leak into the room, not through words, through energetic imprint. And when your beliefs are unspoken but unstable, the field around you carries tension. You'll notice unnecessary resistance, weird emotional friction, lack of clarity or flow, systems breaking down for no visible reason. These are not random glitches. They are feedback loops from the field. And when you ignore the feedback, the system gets louder, because it's not reacting to your performance. It's reflecting your presence. Now here's the key shift. When you begin entering rooms with internal alignment, you stop needing control. You stop over-preparing. You stop over-talking. You stop using force to make things land, because your presence already carries the weight. This is why certain people shift dynamics by entering the room. They don't need a title. They don't need an agenda. They carry a signal that conditions the space around them, and the field adjusts accordingly. This is not about charisma or dominance. It's about stability. When your signal becomes stable, grounded, integrated, silent but strong, you no longer have to perform authority. You become it. The people who shape environments the most aren't trying. They're calibrated. Now pause and ask, when I enter a space, do I feel the room or brace against it? Do I shift to match the energy or let it shift around me? Do I walk in with a centered signal or a rehearsed identity? That's where the work begins. And once you become aware of how the field feels you, you stop negotiating with every room. You stop adapting for approval. You start broadcasting clarity, and clarity organizes everything around it. Next, we will unpack how even your interactions, especially the way people treat you, are shaped by unconscious agreements. You're not just reacting to others. You're responding to contracts you never realized you signed. You now understand that your energy influences more than your mood. It shapes the room, the rhythm, and even the direction of the environments you walk into. But what about people? Why do some treat you with care, while others cross your boundaries with ease? Why do certain relationships feel mutual, and others feel imbalanced without any obvious reason. It's not random. People are responding to a contract, one you didn't consciously write, but have been signing for years. These are the silent social contracts, unspoken agreements you carry into every interaction. They define how much you're allowed to express, how others are permitted to speak to you, what roles you unconsciously accept, how much presence, respect, or attention you receive. And most of them were authored long before you knew you were participating. Let's be clear. You don't explicitly say, "Treat me this way," but your behavior, tone, presence, and energy signal what you'll tolerate, and others subconsciously adjust to match. If your system is wired to avoid conflict, the silent contract might say, "Speak to me however you like. I won't challenge it." If your identity is built around earning worth, the contract may be, "I'll give more than I receive. Just please don't leave." If your nervous system has equated visibility with danger, the agreement becomes, "I'll stay small. Just don't expose me." None of this happens through logic. It happens through patterned interaction. And because these contracts are invisible, you think people are simply being themselves. But they're actually responding to a role you've unconsciously agreed to play. This is why it feels like you keep ending up in the same kinds of relationships. Not just romantic ones, professional, platonic, familial, different people, same unspoken rules. And those rules are shaped by the beliefs you carry, the patterns you repeat, the boundaries you enforce or don't, the roles you learn to play early in life. If you were rewarded for being agreeable, you may unconsciously carry the contract, "I exist to make others comfortable." If you were punished for being too emotional, you might carry, "I must stay composed to be accepted." If you were ignored unless you excelled, your script might say, "My value depends on performance." And so people reflect these roles back to you not because they're cruel, but because the contract tells them to. Until you update that contract, they will continue to sign it, even if you change environments, even if you change relationships, even if you change how you speak, because they are reacting to the energetic and behavioral script underneath your words. So how do you shift it? Start by becoming aware of the contracts you're carrying. Ask, what kinds of treatment do I often accept without realizing? What role do I find myself slipping into around others? What do I give away quickly without checking if it's mutual? Then go deeper. What belief is this contract protecting? What emotion am I avoiding by keeping this pattern alive? That's the emotional debt behind the contract. And until it's repaid through awareness, expression, and boundary repair, the pattern continues. Changing the contract isn't about demanding different treatment. It's about emitting a different message through presence and boundary. You don't tell people how to treat you with words. You show them with how you hold yourself when you say no, when you don't explain, when you stop overextending, when you stay in your truth. That's how the contract gets rewritten. And the moment you change it, everything around you shifts. Not all at once, but enough to know the old agreement has expired. Next, we will take a closer look at the deeper programming behind these contracts, the internal scripts you follow without ever questioning. Not rules you chose, but inherited roles that have shaped your every interaction since the beginning. Now that you've seen how silent social contracts influence how others treat you, we go deeper to the internal scripts that shape your role in those interactions. These aren't strategies you chose. They're adaptations you built. They come from the shadow, the parts of you that learned, through pain or reward, what was acceptable and what was not. And those scripts have become automatic. You may think you're acting freely, but in reality you're following a role, one that was written long ago and rehearsed so many times it now feels like your personality. These are your shadow scripts. They govern your tone, your reactions, your silence, your habits, your impulses. They're not bad. They're not evil. They were protective. But they're not you. They're the version of you that learned how to survive situations where being your full self didn't feel safe. Here are a few of the most common ones. The fixer script. If everyone is okay, I'll be okay. If I'm useful, I won't be abandoned. My worth is what I do for others. The performer script. I must always be on. I can't show weakness. If I don't impress, I'll be ignored. The invisible script. Don't take up too much space. If I'm quiet, I'll stay safe. It's better not to need anything. The defender script. Attack first or be attacked. Vulnerability equals danger. Always prove you're right. Each of these scripts began as protection. They were emotional armor. But now they've become your operating system, silently shaping what you allow, pursue, avoid, or suppress. And because the scripts run automatically, you don't notice them until you start questioning your own reactions. Why do I always feel drained after being around people? Why do I feel responsible for things that aren't mine? Why do I collapse when someone shows disappointment? The answer is almost always, you're not acting from choice. You're acting from script. And that script lives in the part of you you rarely hear, but constantly obey. Here's the most important realization. You didn't write these scripts, but you're performing them every day. And others are responding to the character you're playing, not the self you've never fully revealed. That's why transformation often feels disorienting. Because the moment you stop following the script, people don't recognize you. Some relationships fade. Others resist the change. And that's not failure. That's confirmation that the old story is no longer directing the scene. So how do you identify your script? Notice your emotional reflexes. What do you immediately feel when someone disapproves? Someone asks for help? Someone ignores you? Someone gets closer than expected? Your first internal movement is often scripted, not intentional. And when you catch that reflex, pause. Ask, who taught me this was the correct response? And then ask, what response would feel authentic if I weren't trying to protect myself? That's the beginning of rewriting the role. Because here's the truth. You don't owe the world a performance. You owe yourself authenticity. And that authenticity isn't found in rebellion. It's found in presence, the choice to show up unarmored, unscripted, and no longer shaped by the roles that used to keep you safe, but now only keep you small. Next, we will uncover the final layer of these scripts. The unconscious agreements you say yes to, not with your mouth, but with your nervous system. These are the micro-approvals that silently bind you to identities and roles that no longer serve who you've become. You've just uncovered the shadow scripts, the hidden behavioral roles you've been performing without even knowing it. But those roles persist for one reason. You keep signing agreements you don't realize you're signing. They're not verbal. They're not intellectual. They're nervous system level permissions. They happen quietly, through behavior, tone, body posture, silence, over-explaining, backing down, avoiding eye contact, laughing off discomfort. Each one says, yes, I'll play this role. I accept these terms. These are invisible contracts. They bind you to identities that limit your potential. They keep you stuck in dynamics you've outgrown. And they're enforced not by others, but by your own unconscious compliance. Let's break this down. You're in a conversation. Someone crosses a subtle boundary. They interrupt, dismiss, or make a backhanded comment. You feel it, but you smile, or stay silent, or move on quickly to keep the peace. That's not nothing. That's a contract renewal. Your system just communicated, this behavior is acceptable, not because you want it, because it matches the energy you're used to receiving. Or maybe you're in a group setting. You have something to say, but you hesitate. You let the moment pass. You tell yourself it wasn't that important. But inside, you just reaffirmed the contract that says, my voice doesn't carry weight here. Again, it's not about blame. It's about awareness. These micro-approvals are how the invisible contracts stay signed. And here's the trap. Every time you stay in that compliance loop, the system takes it as proof. Proof that the role is necessary. Proof that the story is still true. Proof that the environment still holds power over your presence. This is how identities persist, not through belief, but through action. Every unchallenged behavior becomes an unspoken agreement. Every avoided moment of truth becomes a signature. And the more you agree, the harder it feels to remember you ever had a choice. This is why people feel like they're stuck as themselves, when really, they're just stuck in a series of agreements that no longer reflect who they've become. So how do you stop signing? You start noticing the moment your body says yes out of habit. You feel that internal flinch, that subtle shrink, that quiet exit from authenticity. That's the moment of negotiation. And in that space, you pause and ask, what contract am I about to renew? And do I want to? Not rhetorically, literally. Ask it. Because the nervous system is a pattern machine. And unless interrupted, it will always choose the option that feels familiar, even if it's misaligned. Here's where the power starts returning. You realize you can say no without explaining. You can disagree without defending. You can disappoint others without collapsing your identity. And each time you do, you void an old contract, not by shouting, not by performing, but by showing up differently. You don't have to burn bridges. You just stop paying the toll. And gradually, your nervous system learns something revolutionary. I can exist without approval. I can express without shrinking. I can be whole without earning it. That's the new agreement. It doesn't need to be declared. It just needs to be embodied. And the moment your embodiment changes, the room responds differently. Because people don't read your mind, they read your alignment. Next, we will examine the patterns that follow when these unconscious contracts go unchallenged, especially the way we sabotage opportunities, growth, and intimacy without realizing we're doing it. Because once the old agreement becomes threatened, the system fights to protect it. Now that you've seen how invisible contracts are signed through subtle, habitual compliance, we need to explore the system's defense mechanism, the one that activates when a new contract threatens the old one. It's called self-sabotage. And it's not what you think. It's not laziness. It's not fear of failure. It's not a lack of discipline. It's a survival reflex, triggered when the nervous system perceives success as unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. You want the healthy relationship, but you ghost someone who respects your boundaries. You want the promotion, but you miss the deadline at the most critical moment. You want peace, but you manufacture drama after a few quiet days. These aren't mistakes. They're internal security measures. You're not afraid of the outcome. You're afraid of the version of you that the outcome would require, because that version violates the contract you've been living under. Let's slow this down. Your current identity is built on a foundation, a familiar emotional baseline. Shame, guilt, pressure, rejection, performance. That foundation supports the roles, responses, and relationships in your life. Now you introduce a new element, success, intimacy, freedom, abundance. And suddenly, everything built on the old foundation begins to shake. That's not your imagination. That's the system resisting collapse. Sabotage is the body's way of saying, this version of you doesn't match the internal architecture. If we move forward, we'll have to rebuild everything. And so, it halts progress, not because you can't have it, but because your baseline isn't calibrated to hold it. This is why the closer you get to breakthrough, the more chaotic things feel. Because breakthrough isn't just about getting something. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to perform for safety. And that's terrifying to the system that only knows performance. So it tries to break what's good before it breaks you. Creates emotional withdrawal, impulsive sabotage, overthinking and paralysis, accidental missteps, burnout cycles at the edge of success, all to keep you close to what's familiar. And what's familiar? That old emotional contract. Even if it's exhausting, even if it keeps you small, it's what the body knows how to feel. This is where awareness becomes power. The next time you feel the urge to ruin something good, for no reason, stop, breathe, and ask, what part of me feels threatened by this becoming easy? What emotion am I used to that this experience contradicts? That question reveals the attachment. That's what sabotage protects. And once you see it, you can do something radical. Stay anyway. Stay when it's good. Stay when you feel seen. Stay when your nervous system says, this can't be real, because it is real. It's just not yet familiar. This is how you recalibrate your baseline. Not by avoiding sabotage, but by interrupting it. You say, I know this isn't dangerous. I'm just experiencing expansion. And each time you hold the moment, the success, the peace, the connection without collapse, your system learns. It updates. It reorients towards safety in the new, rather than loyalty to the old. That's the breakthrough, not the win. The willingness to keep breathing inside the win. Now that you've seen how sabotage is a signal of emotional miscalibration, we'll go one layer deeper, into the root fear that powers all of it. Because beneath every collapse is a single emotion the system can't tolerate, and it's the fear driving everything you avoid. You now understand that sabotage isn't failure, it's protection. A reflex triggered when your system encounters unfamiliar success, love, or freedom. But what's driving that reflex? It isn't random discomfort. It's a specific fear. One that overrides logic. One that rewrites your memory. One that keeps you from stepping forward, even when you desperately want to. The fear is not of failure. It's not even of rejection. It's the fear of emotional exposure. This is the fear below the fear. The thing behind the collapse. The discomfort that tells your body, if I keep going, they'll see me. If they see me, they'll leave. Or judge. Or punish. Or worse. They'll mirror the shame I haven't yet faced. You don't fear success. You fear being seen inside success. You don't fear connection. You fear being felt once someone gets close enough to recognize what you've been hiding. And what are you hiding? Not secrets. Not flaws. Not wrongdoings. You're hiding the part of you that still carries unprocessed emotion. Shame from being overlooked. Guilt from old roles. Grief from not being protected. Anger from feeling powerless. Fear from being too visible, too raw, too real. That's the part the system protects. Because to feel those things fully, without collapse, without panic, requires emotional safety most people have never been taught to create. So the system avoids. It doesn't just avoid people or opportunities. It avoids states. States that trigger those deep emotions. States like intimacy, vulnerability, softness, trust, surrender, success. They sound beautiful, but to a body that equates them with danger, they feel radioactive. So you retreat, or distract, or numb, or rush back into pressure and performance, where you feel more in control. Even if it exhausts you, even if it isolates you. Because when control is your shield, stillness becomes the threat. And in stillness, you'd have to feel. So here's the truth. You're not afraid of losing. You're afraid of feeling what winning might unearth. You're not afraid of being seen. You're afraid of meeting the parts of you you've trained others never to notice. That's what avoidance protects. And that's why the system fights forward motion, not out of malice, but out of loyalty. It wants to keep you safe, not just from harm, but from emotion that once overwhelmed you. The problem? It doesn't distinguish between past and present. So the emotions that once were dangerous are treated like they still are. And unless challenged, that fear becomes permanent architecture. You'll keep navigating by avoidance, avoiding stillness, avoiding expression, avoiding confrontation, avoiding intimacy, avoiding presence, avoiding ease, not because those things are bad, but because they threaten to expose the feeling underneath. But there's only one way out. You turn toward the fear, not with force, with presence. You learn to sit in the discomfort without racing to change it. You breathe when the old feeling comes. You soften when the instinct is to run. You let the system know, this doesn't have to destroy me. That's the moment of reprogramming. Not when the fear disappears, but when your capacity to stay grows larger than your need to escape. And every time you stay without hiding, without shrinking, without fixing, you retrain the system. You teach it that emotional exposure is survivable. And from that place, avoidance begins to lose its power. Next, we will expose what avoidance builds. A structure of emotional safety called the comfort zone. But this zone isn't comfort. It's not even safety. It's a surveillance system designed by fear, for fear, And it's the reason you keep returning to the same internal prison, no matter how much changes on the outside. Now that you've faced the real fear, emotional exposure, let's talk about the territory your nervous system creates to avoid it. It's called the comfort zone. You've heard the term. You've been told to push past it, expand it, break free. But none of that works until you understand what the comfort zone really is. Because it's not a place of comfort. It's a surveillance system. Its job is not to protect you from danger. Its job is to monitor your behavior to prevent emotional risk. Tracks how visible you are, how much vulnerability you express, how much joy or softness you allow, how far you move away from the familiar emotions you've been trained to tolerate. Go too far in any of those areas, the alarms go off, and the system pulls you back in. Not with violence, with guilt, with anxiety, with overthinking, with tension in the chest, with narratives like, this isn't sustainable, or don't get too comfortable, or this isn't really you. That's the surveillance voice, and it doesn't speak for truth. It speaks for familiarity. Because what your system knows how to manage, even if it's pain, chaos, or pressure, feels safer than what it hasn't yet learned how to hold. This is why transformation feels so unstable at first. You're not just trying something new. You're violating the internal watchtower that's been guarding the edges of your emotional safety map. The comfort zone tracks more than your choices. It tracks your state. When you begin feeling joy you didn't earn, relaxation without productivity, love without proving your worth, it scans for risk, and often it interprets ease as danger, because ease was never modeled as safe. So the system deploys countermeasures, subtle ones. You start checking your phone. You start focusing on minor flaws. You pick a fight. You rehearse worst-case scenarios. You don't even realize it's happening, but it is. The comfort zone is reasserting control. Not because you're weak, because the system still thinks its job is to keep you inside a reality that matches your original blueprint. One where control equals safety, tension equals awareness, emotion equals danger, discomfort equals discipline. The comfort zone is less about content and more about emotional GPS. It constantly repositions you toward the emotional frequency you're used to carrying. And if you drift too far, even in a positive direction, it triggers corrections. This is why even wins don't feel good for long. You receive something new, love, recognition, abundance, and your system starts scanning for what's about to go wrong. Why? Because you just exited the monitored zone. Now that you see this, you can stop fighting the comfort zone with intensity and start questioning its logic. Instead of pushing harder, pause and ask, what emotion does my system believe is unsafe right now? What state am I entering that I've never learned how to stay in? What part of me is being exposed? And who taught me that exposure equals threat? Those questions don't erase the alarms, but they prevent you from obeying them. And once you stop obeying, you stop reinforcing, and the surveillance weakens. That's how you actually expand your comfort zone. Not by doing bigger things, by being with bigger states, without collapse, without panic, without retreat. Next, we will expose the identity behind that comfort zone, the part of you that enforces its rules, rehearses its roles, and defines your limits. Not because it's who you really are, but because you've become addicted to being a version of yourself that once helped you survive. You've seen the comfort zone for what it really is, a monitored emotional loop, designed to keep you safe through surveillance, not growth. But something still holds it together, something more powerful than the fear beneath it. It's your identity, your sense of who you are. And here's the part most people never consider. Your identity is often a survival costume. It wasn't chosen freely. It was constructed reactively. And now you're addicted to it because it keeps you inside the emotional conditions your nervous system knows how to manage. Let's be direct. You think you know who you are, but most of what you call me is just a composite of coping mechanisms, past roles, inherited scripts, and conditioned responses, all fused together through repetition and emotional imprint. Feels authentic, but that doesn't mean it's true. You say, I'm the reliable one. I'm the funny one. I'm the strong one. I'm the quiet one. I'm the high achiever. I'm the one who doesn't need much. But those aren't traits. They're roles. And those roles were assigned or rewarded long before you ever realized you were participating. You became who you needed to be to survive, to be accepted, to avoid conflict, to earn love, to prevent shame. And then, once it worked, once the approval or safety showed up, your system locked it in. That version of you became your default setting. But now, that setting is suffocating, because the old you doesn't fit your current self. And the longer you cling to that identity, the harder it becomes to change your life, even if the desire is real. This is the identity illusion. You think your personality is a fixed truth, but it's just the most practiced performance. And you don't hold on to it because it's fulfilling. You hold on to it because it's known. Let's break this down. You grew up needing to be emotionally self-sufficient. So you became the independent one. Now you struggle to ask for help, even when it's freely offered. You were praised for being high-achieving. So you became the successful one. Now slowing down feels like failure, even when your body is begging for rest. You were rejected when you showed emotion. So you became the calm one. Now expressing truth feels like a threat, even when the moment calls for it. You're not being yourself. You're maintaining a version of self that once earned approval. But here's the trap. Because that version kept you emotionally safe, your nervous system coded it as your true identity. So now, anything that threatens that role, vulnerability, change, softness, stillness, gets flagged as danger, even when it's what you crave. This is why transformation feels like psychological death. You're not just shifting behaviors. You're stepping out of a self you've built your entire emotional economy around. And your system panics, because it believes, if I stop being this, I'll lose everything that kept me safe. Approval, connection, stability, belonging. It's not the new version of you that's scary. It's the emotional fallout your system associates with not being the old one. So what do? You begin separating who you are from what you've been performing. You stop saying, that's just who I am, and start asking, who did I need to be in order to avoid discomfort? What emotional outcomes was I managing by becoming this way? What did this identity protect me from? And do I still need that protection? That's how the illusion starts to dissolve. Because once you see your personality as adaptive, not absolute, you become flexible. You become someone who can update your emotional strategy without betraying your core. And that's where true identity begins to emerge. Not the version of you that was trained into performance. The version that was never given permission to breathe. Next, we will reveal exactly how this trained personality was constructed. Not from essence, but from repetition, conditioning, and feedback loops that shaped your nervous system long before you had words to describe what was happening. Now that you've seen your identity as an adaptive mask, one built from necessity, not freedom, it's time to examine how that mask was made. Because what you call a personality isn't just a blend of quirks and preferences. It's a system installation, and it was written into your nervous system before you ever knew you had a say. This isn't metaphor, it's mechanics. Your personality is the output of a trained pattern, a response to repeated emotional conditions that shaped what your body learned to expect, allow, and avoid. It's not who you are. It's who you learned to be, based on what felt safe, rewarded, or necessary. Let's take a step back. As a child, you're exposed to thousands of micro-experiences. Each moment teaches your system something. What gets attention? What gets ignored? What causes connection? What triggers withdrawal? What makes people stay? What makes them pull away? Your body records it all. And then, without logic, without words, it begins to shape your emotional blueprint. That blueprint becomes your personality. If being cheerful got you noticed, your system coded cheerfulness as survival. If being quiet avoided conflict, silence became safety. If being helpful earned love, helpfulness became worth. These aren't traits, they're programs, and they repeat over and over until they feel natural, not because they're your truth, but because they've been installed through repetition plus emotional reward. This is why your preferences feel personal, but many aren't. You like what you were taught to like. You avoid what you were trained to fear. You tolerate what you've been emotionally desensitized to. And then you call it personality, but it's just pattern. Here's the key distinction. Your essence is who you are beneath conditioning. Your personality is who you became to survive it. Now let's bring this back to your current reality. You're still running those early patterns, not because they're useful, because your system believes they are required. Even when they create burnout, emotional numbness, lack of connection, imposter syndrome, identity confusion, the system doesn't care. Its goal isn't joy, it's consistency, and your personality, the installed version, gives it that. But here's the danger. When your personality becomes your prison, growth feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the identity that once saved you. Betrayal of the version of you who kept it all together. And that version, the one who built the emotional scaffolding you live inside, won't leave quietly. It will argue. It will plead. It will tell you that becoming someone new means losing yourself. But that's the trick. The installed personality isn't the real you. It's just the version that was allowed to exist inside an environment that couldn't hold your full self. So how do you shift it? Not by destroying it, by updating it one emotional allowance at a time. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "What part of me was never given permission to exist? And am I ready to let it speak now?" That question doesn't erase the old pattern, but it interrupts its authority. And from there, something powerful begins to emerge. The self that was never installed. The self that's been waiting beneath the updates. The self that didn't need to perform to survive. Next, we will explore what happens when you try to break free from that installed personality, and why it feels like death to the nervous system. Because the system isn't just wired to repeat patterns. It's wired to protect the identity those patterns support. You've just seen how your personality was installed. A system of patterns, emotional adaptations, and repetitive roles designed to ensure psychological survival. But now we need to face the most uncomfortable truth of all. Letting go of that personality doesn't just feel hard. It feels like dying. Not metaphorically, physiologically, because the body doesn't separate identity loss from threat to existence. Let's be precise. You've spent years, maybe decades, becoming someone the world could accept, predict, or reward. Even if that version of you came at the cost of your truth, your softness, your creativity, or your presence, it became safe. And now, you're trying to replace that identity with one that's real. One that's aligned, not performative. Whole, not fragmented. But to your nervous system, this doesn't register as evolution. It registers as annihilation. Because it's not just about adopting new habits or beliefs. It's about stepping out of a version of self that kept you emotionally alive. And the moment you do, your entire internal system panics. It floods you with emotion, doubt, anxiety, overthinking, urgency, confusion. Why? Because the self you've been isn't just familiar, it's home. Even if it's a prison, even if it's exhausting, even if it no longer fits who you are or where you're going. Here's what most people miss. The resistance you feel isn't a lack of willpower. It's grief. You are grieving the version of you that got you this far. And grief is not rational. It's not linear. It doesn't care how much you want to change. It only cares about what's being lost. And that old you, with all its flaws and functions, is being lost. This is why change that seems positive on paper, more peace, more rest, more truth, more boundaries, often creates internal chaos. You're not just rewiring your life. You're breaking loyalty to a self that used to feel like survival. And that break feels like betrayal. So instead of moving forward, you pull back. You return to chaos, overgiving, hiding, performance, not because it works, but because it's where your identity feels recognizable. This is the habit of being you. You return to familiar thoughts, familiar emotions, familiar dynamics, familiar self-judgments, not because they serve you, Because they stabilize you. And here's the paradox. The longer you stay loyal to the self you no longer want to be, the more unstable you'll feel. Because a part of you knows, this version of me was only supposed to be temporary. But the system doesn't care. The system wants certainty, even if it costs you joy. So what's the way through? You stop fighting the resistance, and you start acknowledging the grief. You say, I see you, old self. You protected me. You performed for me. You held it all together. You were never the problem, you were the solution. But I don't need that solution anymore. And now, I let you go. You don't crush the habit of being you. You thank it for its service. And you replace it not with force but with repetition. New actions, new thoughts, new responses, new identities, practiced often enough to create familiarity. That's how change stops feeling like death. Not because you've erased the old self, but because you've made the new one feel safe enough to live. Next, we'll look at what makes change so physically difficult. Not just emotionally, but neurologically. Because your brain isn't just clinging to the past psychologically. It's wired to return you to your old self unless you intervene with conscious repetition and design. Now that you've experienced the emotional toll of change, the grief, the confusion, the collapse, it's time to understand why this resistance feels so automatic, so relentless, so physical. It's not just psychological. It's neurological. Your brain is built to pull you back into the same loops, the same thoughts, the same identity, not because they're healthy, because they're efficient. Here's the truth. Your brain runs on survival and energy conservation. Its number one priority isn't joy, growth, or alignment. It's predictability. And the more you repeat something, a thought, behavior, or emotional state, the more the brain reinforces it as a default neural pathway. Those pathways become highways. Quick, automatic, energetically cheap. The brain loves that. It rewards repetition with ease of access. So when you try to build a new identity, speak up when you used to stay quiet, set a boundary where you used to fold, rest when you used to perform, you're forcing the brain to do new construction. That costs energy, that creates discomfort, and that triggers resistance. Not because you're weak, because you're literally pulling yourself out of neurological gravity. The old you is the most practiced, and the brain loves practice. Think of it like this. If your identity is a building, the old self is a skyscraper, reinforced with steel and concrete, built over years of emotional repetition. The new self is scaffolding, wooden beams, exposed supports, still under construction. And when the storm of stress or fear hits, you run back into the skyscraper, even if it's collapsing, even if it's full of cracks, because the body believes it's still safer than standing exposed in a new, unfamiliar space. This is why change feels inconsistent. You get a breakthrough, you feel powerful, you act from truth, and then, a week later, you're back in the old loop. You didn't lose the progress. You just got pulled by neural gravity. But here's what matters. You can interrupt it. You can rewire it. Not by willpower alone, but by creating new circuits through repetition. Every time you make a new choice, speak a new truth, hold a new boundary, soften into a new state, you're laying neural tracks. You're pouring concrete into a new identity. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be consistent enough for the brain to start recognizing the new path as the default. Because once that happens, the old identity loses its grip. Not because you fought harder, but because your biology stopped defaulting to it. So here's the invitation. Instead of trying to force massive transformation overnight, ask, what one signal can I send my brain today that affirms who I'm becoming? Then repeat it, daily, quietly, deliberately, and over time, that repetition becomes reality. Next, we'll explore the final internal war. The moment when your mind, now threatened by this new identity, starts to gaslight your soul. This isn't sabotage, it's survival. But unless you learn to catch it, the mind will always trick you into going back, even when the new you is ready to take the lead. By now, you've seen how your nervous system clings to the familiar, and how your brain, wired for efficiency, not truth, keeps trying to reroute you back into the old identity. But there's one more internal force working against your evolution. It's not fear. It's not sabotage. It's mental gaslighting. Specifically, your mind gaslighting your soul. It happens quietly. You start feeling aligned. You have a moment of truth. You speak it. You act on it. And for a moment, it lands. You feel real, present, clear. But then, almost instantly, a voice kicks in. That was too much. You're being dramatic. No one really cares. Who do you think you are to speak like that? They're going to leave now. And just like that, the alignment dissolves. Not because it was false, because the mind couldn't tolerate its truth. This is the most cunning pattern of all. Your mind, trained by years of survival, starts attacking the very parts of you that are finally trying to breathe. Not because they're wrong, but because they threaten the system's emotional structure. The soul says, "This feels right." The mind replies, "That can't be trusted." The soul says, "This is who I am." The mind replies, "That's not safe." The soul says, "Let's stay open." The mind replies, "Close now or we'll get hurt." This inner war isn't about logic. It's about emotional survival. The mind was trained to manage pain, risk, rejection, and judgment. The soul was born to express, connect, reveal, and create. And the more your soul begins to lead, the more your mind feels obsolete. And it panics. So it tries to regain control the only way it knows how, by invalidating your inner knowing. It doesn't sound loud. It sounds reasonable, protective, smart, grounded. But it's not protecting you. It's protecting the version of you that doesn't exist anymore, the one who relied on control, suppression, and smallness to feel safe. So what do you do when your mind becomes the voice of gaslight? You stop trying to out-argue it. You stop giving it the mic. You stop begging it to approve your evolution. And instead, you do something radical. You choose the soul anyway. You say, "I know this choice doesn't make sense to the mind, and I'm making it anyway. I know the mind is screaming that this will backfire, and I'm staying anyway. I know I've been trained to doubt the real me, and I'm trusting her anyway." This is the moment the system begins to recalibrate. Because you're no longer asking the mind for permission to become who you already are. You're not trying to silence the doubt. You're just not giving it authority anymore. You let the mind panic, and you keep going. You let the fear speak, and you don't obey it. You let the logic argue, and you move from alignment anyway. That's what it means to stop being managed by your mind, and start being led by your soul. And here's what's beautiful. Every time you do this, every single time, your nervous system learns a new lesson. Truth didn't kill me. Honesty didn't abandon me. Self-expression didn't destroy me. That's how safety gets rewritten. Next, we'll finally tune in to that quiet voice. The one that's been buried under performance, doubt, and noise. The voice that has been speaking to you since the beginning. Not loudly, not forcefully, just patiently, waiting for you to listen. After witnessing the mind's desperate attempt to invalidate your truth, you might wonder why the soul doesn't just speak louder. Why doesn't your inner knowing yell? Why doesn't it command attention? Why doesn't it shout over the noise? The answer? Because it never had to. The soul doesn't compete. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It simply is. And it's always there. Quiet, calm, certain. You just haven't been trained to hear it. The mind demands urgency. The ego needs volume. The fear insists on explanation. But the soul whispers, not because it's weak, because it doesn't need to be loud to be true. The soul says, "This relationship isn't aligned. This work drains you. You're holding back again. You already know what you want. Stop asking." Says it once, maybe twice. And then it waits, not because it gives up, because it respects your choice. That's why soul-aligned decisions often feel peaceful and terrifying at the same time. Peaceful because they resonate so deeply, there's no confusion. Terrifying because the consequences of trusting that voice might unravel everything you've built from the mind. But if you listen, if you truly listen, you'll notice something strange. The voice of the soul never uses fear. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't catastrophize. It just tells the truth. And the truth always lands with stillness, even when it's disruptive. That's how you know it's not the mind. The mind deals in tension. The soul brings clarity. So why is this voice so hard to follow? Because it often leads away from comfort, away from control, away from approval, away from external validation, and into the unknown. Not because the unknown is risky, but because it's real. And real requires you to feel, to let go, to stop performing. You can't follow the soul and maintain the old persona. You have to choose. And choosing isn't a one-time act. It's a daily practice. You hear the noise, and you choose the quiet voice underneath it. You feel the fear, and you stay with the deeper knowing beneath it. You notice the mind panicking, and you don't let it take the wheel. This is what most people miss. Your soul doesn't need to be found. It's never been lost. It's just been talking over silence, waiting for you to stop tuning into chaos. And once you do, once you learn the tone, the cadence, the feeling of your own alignment, you'll realize something profound. The voice you've been searching for has always been here, not far away, not mystical, just unheard. So how do you listen better? Start small. Notice when something feels clean. Not exciting, not dramatic, not urgent, just clear. Follow that, even when your mind argues, especially then. Because the soul doesn't shout when you ignore it. It simply waits until you're quiet enough to hear it again. Next, we'll learn to decode the wisdom of that quiet voice. Not in metaphor, not in mysticism, but in the form of a thought that never came from your conditioning, never from your fear, but from your most aligned self, waiting to be lived through you. Now that you've started to hear the voice beneath the noise, the calm, quiet signal of the soul, you might be wondering, if that voice isn't made of thoughts, then what is it? The answer will change how you relate to your own mind forever. Because not all thoughts are yours. And the ones that feel the truest, they're often the ones you didn't think in the traditional sense. They arose. They appeared. They arrived whole, unforced, without rehearsal. And you probably dismissed them. You're used to thoughts that are noisy, repetitive, urgent, analytical, fueled by fear or strategy, looping in circles to prove a point or prevent danger. But then, every now and then, something cuts through. A phrase, a knowing, a sentence so simple it almost feels irrelevant. You don't belong here anymore. This isn't you. Say what you actually mean. Walk away. Trust that you already know. That's the thought you've never thought. It didn't come from your training. It didn't arise from panic. It wasn't generated by your mental pattern library. It came from presence, from soul. And here's how you know it's real. It lands with clarity, not adrenaline. It doesn't spike your system. It doesn't demand you act. It just sits there undeniable. And for a brief moment, without effort, without debate, without logic, you just know. But that moment usually passes. Because the conditioned mind kicks in immediately. That's unrealistic. How would I explain that? What if I'm wrong? That doesn't make sense. And so the clarity is swallowed by confusion. Not because the thought wasn't true, but because the system wasn't ready to accept it. The thought you've never thought doesn't need validation. It needs space, which is why you must practice stillness, not to escape thought, but to catch the ones that don't come from programming. You'll know it's a true thought if it doesn't loop. It doesn't need to be defended. It feels obvious but not habitual. It doesn't answer a question, it dissolves one. And here's the most radical part. These thoughts aren't occasional. They're always available. But your access to them is blocked by the noise of your old self. When that noise settles, through breath, presence, embodiment, you don't discover truth. You hear what's been there the whole time. So, how do you make this a consistent experience? You stop trying to manufacture thoughts and start creating conditions for true ones to appear. You start treating thought like signal, not content. You ask, is this thought trying to protect my identity? Or is it revealing my truth? Did I think this out of habit? Or did it arrive from presence? Would this thought make sense even if no one else heard it but me? Those are the filters. And when used consistently, they do something incredible. They begin to quiet the reactive thinker and amplify the conscious receiver. Because that's what you are when you're aligned. Not a producer of thought, a receiver of signal. And that signal is coming from the version of you that isn't scared, fragmented, or confused. It's coming from the you who already exists outside the maze. Next, we'll expose what that version of you has been trying to redesign all along, the unconscious architecture of your reality. Because while you've been trying to change your thoughts, your subconscious has been building the walls of your life according to a blueprint you never saw until now. You've now learned how to access the thought that isn't manufactured, the one that cuts through noise with startling clarity. But clarity alone won't change your reality. You must understand what your subconscious has been building in the background this entire time. Because your life isn't random. Your environment, your relationships, your results, your emotional baseline, they're all shaped by an invisible blueprint. And that blueprint, it wasn't written by logic. It was constructed by emotional history. Let's break this down. Your subconscious doesn't care about your goals. Cares about one thing only: congruence. It wants your external world to match your internal expectations, regardless of whether those expectations are empowering or toxic. So if you've been conditioned to expect rejection, your subconscious will build relationships where that dynamic feels normal. If you were trained to feel unworthy of rest, you'll structure your schedule to keep you exhausted. If your identity is wired to fear visibility, you'll unconsciously block opportunities that would put you in the spotlight. This isn't self-sabotage. It's blueprint fulfillment. Your subconscious is the architect. Your conscious mind is the tenant. And if those two aren't in agreement, you'll always feel like life is pushing against you, even when, technically, nothing's wrong. Now here's the tricky part. You can't rewrite the blueprint just by thinking new thoughts. Because the blueprint wasn't written with words. It was written with emotional patterning. Moments repeated. Feelings reinforced. Energy accepted as normal. And over time, your system began drawing invisible lines. This is how much love I can hold. This is how much ease I can feel before it becomes dangerous. This is how much success I'm allowed before guilt kicks in. This is how I should respond to rejection, praise, failure, connection. Those lines became walls. And those walls became your life. So even when you outgrow the story intellectually, the structure remains. That's why change feels like hitting an invisible ceiling. Because you are literally, the blueprint is holding you in place. Here's how you begin to see it. You look at your patterns without judgment. You say, if this keeps happening, it's not random. If I keep attracting this dynamic, there's a reason. If I sabotage progress at the same point every time, something in me is calling that familiar. You stop blaming fate. You start identifying code. Because that's what the blueprint is, a code of assumptions, expectations, and subconscious rules. And here's the most empowering part. The moment you can name the code, you can start rewriting it. Not by fighting reality, but by building new congruence. That means aligning your emotional body with what your conscious self says it wants. So if you want peace, but you're only familiar with urgency, you don't force stillness. You train your body to believe that stillness is safe. If you want love, but you expect abandonment, you don't beg for affection. You practice holding connection even when your system flinches. This is blueprint rewriting. It's not motivational. It's architectural. You're teaching your system that new emotional patterns are survivable. And as that truth sets in, the blueprint updates. And once the blueprint updates, your external world begins to reorganize to match. Because the subconscious no longer needs to create environments that reinforce the old design. Next, we'll learn the practical method to begin this restructuring, not just from thought, not just from belief, but from frame. Because when you stop rearranging the picture and start changing the frame that holds it, the entire scene begins to shift. You've now seen that your subconscious blueprint determines what your reality looks like, not your surface-level thinking, not your effort, not your intentions. And maybe you've tried this before. Maybe you've worked on your mindset. Maybe you've shifted beliefs, used affirmations, thought better thoughts. But something didn't stick. Because what you were trying to change was the picture. What needed to change was the frame. So what is the frame? It's not a belief. It's the context your entire system operates inside. The invisible assumptions. The unconscious rules. The shape you place around experience that determines how you interpret it. Most people think in pictures, but their life is dictated by the frame they don't realize is there. Example, you feel a wave of stillness and relief after setting a boundary. But if your frame says peace equals danger or slowness equals laziness, your system will reject the experience, not because the moment was wrong, but because the frame said it didn't belong. Or you have a breakthrough in self-worth. You say what you mean. You feel the clarity of truth. But your frame says honesty causes loss. So you pull back the next day. You apologize for being too much. You edit yourself to stay acceptable. You disown the exact expansion you claimed. Why? Because the picture changed, but the frame stayed the same. So what does changing the frame actually look like? It starts with noticing what context you assign to your own emotions, behaviors, and desires. You ask, what story do I automatically place around this moment? What do I assume this state will cost me? What emotional consequence do I fear when I shift into this version of myself? The answers won't come from your conscious mind. They'll come from your body, from the resistance, the guilt, the confusion, the urgency to fix, to shrink, to prove. All of that tells you what frame you've been using. Because the picture of success doesn't matter. If the frame says, you'll be abandoned when you shine, the picture of love won't stay. If the frame says your needs are too much, the picture of ease won't hold. If the frame says you only earn value through suffering. So you stop rearranging the images, and you start replacing the frames. From peace equals threat to peace equals power. From truth equals loss to truth equals liberation. From visibility equals danger to visibility equals alignment. You don't just shift how you behave. You shift how your system holds the meaning of the behavior. That's real transformation. And this happens through conscious declaration, yes, but also through repetition. Reinforcement. Safety. You teach your body that the new frame is safe to live inside. You rehearse it until your subconscious stops flinching. And when it finally accepts the new frame, that's when change becomes sustainable. Because now your nervous system wants to stay in the new reality. There's no longer a war between your truth and your safety. There's alignment, and alignment always holds. Next, we'll get practical. You'll learn how to catch the old programming not after it wrecks your day, not after it ruins the moment, but right as it activates. Because that's the moment everything becomes possible. The real-time interruption of unconscious thought. Now you know that changing your life isn't about upgrading the picture. It's about replacing the frame that makes certain states unsafe. But what about the moment it all starts to slip? The second your system launches back into the old pattern. The pull, the shutdown, the reaction you didn't think about, it just happened. This is where most people lose traction, because they realize it after the fact. They say, why did I say yes to that again? Why did I shrink back just now? Why did I respond like that when I promised myself I wouldn't? It feels automatic. Because it is. But here's the breakthrough. You can catch the pattern in real time. Before it runs your body. Before it hijacks your behavior. Before it rewrites the story you're trying to live. This moment is called the disruption point. And it doesn't happen at the level of thought. It happens at the level of sensation. Your body gives you the warning. Every time. Maybe it's a tightness in the chest, a heat in the face, a clench in the jaw, a sudden sense of urgency, dread, or pressure. It doesn't scream, "Hey, you're about to sabotage everything." It just tenses. That's the signal. And if you can catch it right there, you can disrupt the loop. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to analyze it. You don't even need to stop the emotion. You just need to become aware before the behavior launches. You pause, not as a tactic, as a pattern break. That pause changes everything, because it creates conscious space inside what used to be unconscious automation. In that space, you get to ask, what version of me is about to take the wheel? What pattern is trying to reassert itself right now? What story am I unconsciously trying to fulfill by doing this? And then the most powerful question of all, what would I do right now if I were free? Not free in theory, free in body, in nervous system, in identity. That question rewrites the moment, because it activates the version of you that's no longer ruled by the loop. This is disruption, and it's not about doing something wild or dramatic. It's about doing something unexpected. You say no when you always say yes. You speak when you always stay silent. You pause when you always react. You breathe when you always explain. That interruption isn't just behavioral. It's neurological. It begins forming a new groove in the mind. One that says, this moment can go differently. That groove, repeated enough, becomes a new default. And that default becomes a new self. Not a version that has to fight the loop, but one that no longer lives in it. You're not erasing the past. You're stopping it from dictating the next 5 seconds. And then the 5 seconds after that. That's how reality shifts, not in grand events, but in micro moments of returned awareness. So here's the takeaway. You don't have to fix everything at once. You just need to own the next impulse. Notice it, interrupt it, choose differently even if just by 1%, and do it again, and again, and again. That repetition becomes reprogramming, and that reprogramming becomes your new alignment. Next, we'll show you the most effective loop-breaking tools you can use when that disruption point hits. Not theory, actual mechanisms that work, fast, reliably, and without drama, to reset your internal signal while the pattern is still trying to run. By now, you've learned to catch the moment, the disruption signal, where an old pattern starts to fire. That awareness alone is powerful. But if you don't break the loop fully, it will find its way back in. Catching the pattern is step 1. Interrupting it is step 2. And that's where transformation really starts to stick. So let's get clear. Pattern interrupt is not a gimmick. It's a neurological intervention. You are manually halting a behavior that was trying to run automatically and sending your system a new signal. This is not the only way. The brain thrives on efficiency. So when it sees a repeated behavior get interrupted consistently, it starts to weaken the old loop. Not because you forced it, because you've shown it that the pattern is no longer necessary. Let's get tactical. Here are several types of interrupts that work, not in theory but in lived biology. 1. Physical movement. If the loop activates as anxiety, shutdown, or urgency, move, stand, stretch, shake your arms, walk out of the room, touch something cold, tap your chest. This isn't distraction. The state disruption. You're sending a jolt to the body that tells the nervous system, we're not following this old script. 2. Vocal pattern jams. Say something out loud that doesn't match the loop. Examples: nope, not this time. I'm not doing this today. Pause. Breathe. Choose. Old me wants to react. New me is watching. You're not trying to believe the words instantly. You're using sound to cut the autopilot. It works because your brain listens to tone more than logic. 3. Micro-movement reversals. If the pattern is behavioral, like going to people please, shut down, explain, fix, do the opposite physically. If you'd normally lean forward in tension, lean back. If you'd shrink your posture, straighten. If you'd look away, hold eye contact. If you'd say yes, simply pause instead of speaking. The tiniest interruption of muscle memory sends a new signal to the subconscious. We're not obeying that command anymore. 4. Breath interrupts. The breath mirrors the loop. If the loop is tension, the breath gets shallow. If the loop is shut down, it stops altogether. So you break it by deliberate control. Inhale deeply, but then exhale longer than feels normal. Do it twice. This turns off the stress response before the mind catches up. And that delay is the power window. 5. Humor and absurdity. Yes, seriously. Interruptions that feel absurd disarm the pattern. If you feel yourself spinning out emotionally, try something radically unserious. Make a weird face. Whisper instead of yelling. Pretend you're narrating your moment as a nature documentary. Say, "Okay, brain, that's enough nonsense for today. This isn't avoidance. It's power through incongruence." You're showing the brain that the loop doesn't own the atmosphere anymore. Here's the key principle behind all of these. The pattern only survives through momentum. Interrupt the momentum, and the pattern breaks. And the earlier you interrupt, the less repair you'll have to do later. This is how emotional reactivity turns into conscious choice. Not by having no reactions, but by owning the window between the trigger and your next move. That space? That's where your power lives. Next, we'll explore what happens right after the pattern breaks. The critical window where your mind is open to new programming. If you act in that moment, you don't just reset. You replace. That's where reprogramming begins. In the exact space the old code just lost its grip. You've just learned how to break loops, how to intervene physically, mentally, and emotionally before your old self hijacks the moment. But here's where most people stop. They interrupt the loop. They feel relief, but they don't replace it with anything new. And so the pattern returns eventually. Why? Because the mind hates a vacuum. When you remove the old code and don't install something in its place, the system reverts to what it knows. Not because it prefers the old pattern, but because it has nothing else to run. So what do you do once the loop is broken? You program the replacement. This is the most fertile moment. The old groove has been stopped. The momentum is neutralized. Your brain is in a flexible, impressionable state. That's when you feed it new code. Let's walk through exactly how to do it. Step 1. Claim the interruption. Say something as the new self that acknowledges the break. Example, "I just did something I've never done. I paused instead of performing." This isn't ego. It's reinforcement. You're tagging the nervous system with the message. This is the new normal. Step 2. Drop in the new signal. Not a mantra. A real, believable, aligned statement that the body can absorb. Example, "I can handle this with calm. Peace is safe for me now. My needs matter here. I don't owe an explanation. I am safe being seen." Speak slowly. Let the words land. Pause between phrases. It's not about saying it. It's about letting the body feel it. Step 3. Take a micro-aligned action. Right then, in that window, do something that proves the new programming. Tiny action. Big signal. Say no. Step back. Don't reply. Close the browser tab. Sit instead of rushing. Let the moment be incomplete. This is where the reprogramming roots itself. Not just in language, but in behavioral evidence. You're telling the brain, this new pattern isn't hypothetical. It's happening. Step 4. Anchor it with presence. Once you've acted, pause. Place a hand on your body. Close your eyes. Feel the internal shift. Name what just changed. Even if it's small. Even if it's subtle. Say, "I just chose from the real me. I didn't abandon myself this time. I stayed with truth longer than I ever have." That statement becomes memory. The memory becomes a neural imprint. The imprint becomes the new loop. Repeat this process and your system begins to prefer the new pattern. Not just accept it, prefer it. Because it begins associating your new behavior with safety, connection, and relief, instead of threat, rejection, or guilt. That's how reprogramming sticks. You're not trying to fake it till you make it. You're creating evidence. Real proof that your nervous system can hold new behavior without collapse. And with enough of that evidence, the old code loses its power. Not because it was wrong, but because it's no longer relevant to who you are. Next, we'll break down how this change becomes physical. You'll learn how the brain literally rewires itself to support the new identity, and how to speed up that process using repetition, emotion, and safety to create permanent shifts in thought and behavior. Now that you've learned how to break old loops and install new ones, it's time to understand the deeper mechanics behind why those shifts actually work, and how to accelerate them. Because behavior change isn't just psychological, it's biological, and the biology that matters most here is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself, not just during childhood, but for your entire life. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every action you repeat either reinforces an existing pathway or begins to carve a new one. The more repetition, the deeper the groove. The more emotional intensity, the faster the imprint. This is how old identities stay in place for years, even when we consciously know better. Because it's not about what you know. It's about what your brain has memorized as safe and familiar. But here's the breakthrough. Your brain is always updating. The moment you send it a new signal with enough consistency, emotional resonance, and safety, it will begin to rewire your reality. Automatically. That means you don't have to fight the old pattern forever. You don't have to force the new one daily. You just have to reinforce the signal until the brain registers it as the new default. Let's get practical. There are 3 conditions that make neuroplastic change stick. 1. Emotional charge. 2. Behavioral consistency. 3. Felt safety. Let's unpack each. Emotional charge means the brain pays more attention to what you feel deeply. When you install a new pattern, like staying grounded in a trigger or speaking truth where you used to fold, and you feel the relief, the empowerment, or even the fear that comes with it, that emotion sends a message. This matters, and your brain listens. That's why change through experience is faster than change through thought. The stronger the emotional signal, the deeper the neural imprint. Behavioral consistency means repetition, not perfection. Your brain doesn't care if you did it flawlessly. It cares if you did it again, and again, and again. Each time you repeat the new pattern, even clumsily, you make it easier to access next time. And with enough reps, it becomes automatic. That's not discipline. That's neuroplasticity. Felt safety is what makes the other 2 possible. Because if your nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to practice the new behavior, your brain won't register it as doable. So you don't just tell yourself it's safe. You create micro-moments of proof. Like, I set that boundary and nothing exploded. I said no and I'm still loved. I slowed down and the world didn't collapse. That's how safety becomes evidence-based. And once your body believes it, your brain stops fighting the change. Together, these 3 conditions, emotion, repetition, and safety, create fast-track rewiring. This is how identity evolves from effort to ease. Not because you figured it out intellectually, but because your system learned the new pattern through lived experience. And when it finally clicks, that's when something remarkable happens. You stop having to think better thoughts. They just start appearing. Why? Because your neural default has changed. The loops have rerouted. The signal has updated. And the you that once felt like a vision becomes normal. Next, we'll see what it's like when you begin to live from that new baseline. When the soul finally becomes the source of your signal, and your thoughts stop echoing fear, trauma, or programming, and start echoing truth. You've seen how the brain rewires itself. You've learned how to reinforce new patterns through repetition, emotion, and felt safety. But what happens when the shift lands? When the soul, not the survival pattern, becomes the loudest voice in the room, everything changes. Because now, the signal you're broadcasting isn't conditioned by fear. It's aligned with truth. And that signal starts to produce different thoughts, effortlessly. Let's clarify this. When you're running on old programming, your thoughts feel reactive, defensive, urgent, self-monitoring, guilt-driven, predictive. They sound like, I have to. What if they? I shouldn't. They'll think I need to prove. But when the soul takes over, your internal dialogue changes completely. It becomes, I feel clear. This is mine. I'm not rushing. They can respond how they need to. I'll stay grounded. There's no performance in those thoughts. No manipulation. No explanation. No noise. Just presence. And here's the thing. You don't have to force these thoughts. They arise naturally because your internal signal has changed. Your emotional baseline is no longer urgency. It's resonance. Your decisions aren't fear-avoidant. They're clarity-led. And the people, opportunities, and moments you attract, they start to match that. Not because you manifested them, because your signal became clean. Let's be precise about what signal means. It's the sum total of what you think, feel, and embody on a moment-to-moment basis, even when you're silent. People feel it. Environments respond to it. Your body regulates based on it. So when that signal shifts from fear to truth, the entire field around you adjusts. And no, this doesn't mean life becomes perfect. You'll still face challenge. You'll still feel emotion. You'll still have thoughts that try to pull you back. But the anchor point is different. You don't get swallowed by reaction. You don't collapse into the past. You don't ask your mind to prove your worth every day. You're operating from the soul signal, and that creates an entirely different baseline. You notice it in small ways at first. You stop explaining yourself. You stop reaching for reassurance. You stop tolerating what drains you. You stop confusing guilt with guidance. And over time, you become someone whose entire energy field communicates. I am home inside myself. That's not a performance. It's a frequency, and frequency never lies. This is when life begins to flow differently. You attract experiences that don't drain you. You set boundaries without guilt. You speak truth without panic. Not because you practice scripts, because the signal behind your behavior has shifted. And the people who meet you in this space, they feel the difference. They don't just respond to your words, they respond to your grounded presence. Because presence is a broadcast. And when you're thinking from the soul, that presence becomes unshakable. So what now? Now that the signal has shifted, you amplify it, you live from it, you trust it, and most importantly, you protect it. Because this signal is no longer just an idea. It's who you are when you stop being who you were trained to be. Next, we'll look at how the world begins to respond to that signal, how others sense the change, and how your external reality reorganizes around the energy of a mind that's finally aligned with its soul. You've made the shift. You're no longer thinking from noise. You're thinking from clarity. But the impact doesn't stop with you. The signal you now carry, this alignment between mind and soul, doesn't just change your thoughts. It broadcasts, and others pick it up, instantly, even if they don't know what changed, even if they can't articulate why they feel different around you. They feel it, because energy doesn't wait for language to make it real. Let's strip this down. Every human being carries a field, an emotional signature, a resonance that others interpret subconsciously, faster than they hear your words, faster than they analyze your logic. It happens in the first few seconds, not based on what you say, but based on what your system is radiating. Before, when your thoughts were shaped by fear, shame, or defense, you broadcasted that without meaning to. People sensed your urgency. They sensed your over-efforting. They felt your need to be validated, liked, understood, approved. Even if you masked it well, your field told the truth. Because your emotional baseline was still leaking the signal of your past. Now, something different is happening. You walk into a room and people pause. They soften. They respect your boundary before you set it. They hesitate to project onto you. They feel your center even in silence. You're not louder. You're clearer. You're no longer seeking to be perceived correctly. You're simply being. And that alone shifts the relational dynamic. But here's the nuance. People don't respond to who you say you are. They respond to what your energy believes you are. If your energy says, "I'm not enough unless I prove myself," they'll subconsciously treat you like someone who has to prove. If your energy says, "I hold my worth no matter your opinion," they'll treat you as someone whose presence commands respect, without you needing to say a word. This is what emotional broadcasting means. Not performance, not manipulation, not charisma, congruence. When your nervous system, beliefs, and actions are aligned, the broadcast becomes undeniable. Now, that doesn't mean everyone will love it. Some people will feel confronted. Some will fall away. Some will resist the shift, especially those who benefited from your older signal. But the ones who stay, the ones who step toward this new resonance, those are the connections that start building a reality that matches the new you. This is where the feedback loop begins. You think from alignment, you broadcast that frequency. Others feel it and respond accordingly. The world reflects back a life that matches your signal. That loop is what makes the change sustainable. Because you're no longer doing it alone. Your external world begins to co-sign your evolution. But here's the key. You have to hold the signal even when it's not immediately mirrored. That's the test. Do you maintain your clarity when others don't yet respond the way you hoped? Can you stay centered when the world's still adjusting to your shift? If so, your signal becomes unshakable. It becomes a force field. And from there, the new reality builds itself. Not from pressure, not from effort, but from energetic congruence. You're no longer trying to manifest a different life. You're transmitting a version of yourself that makes that life inevitable. Next, we'll anchor that version in place. Because you don't just want moments of alignment. You want permanence. We're going to explore how to reinforce this identity until it becomes your default. Not something you practice, but something you are. You've upgraded your signal. People feel it. Your external life has begun to reflect it. But now comes the final piece of stabilization. Making sure this shift doesn't fade. Because here's the reality. The old identity doesn't disappear just because you had a breakthrough. It waits. It watches. And if you stop feeding the new signal with reinforcement, the old pattern will try to re-enter. Quietly, slowly, subtly. Not because you're failing, but because momentum always needs maintenance. This is where you begin building the inner echo. What is that? It's the repeated internal signal that reminds your system who you've become, until it no longer needs the reminder. Until it becomes automatic. Here's how you do it. Step 1. Track your alignment. Daily. Don't just journal. Don't just reflect. Actually write, what thoughts matched my new identity today? What did I say or do that my old self never would have? What did I tolerate less of? Where did I pause before reacting? When you track alignment, you normalize it. Your nervous system begins associating this version of you with regularity. It stops feeling like a peak state. It becomes home. Step 2. Celebrate shifts, not perfection. You'll still make old moves sometimes. That doesn't erase progress. What matters is noticing. I caught it sooner. I returned faster. I lost less energy. Those are the signals your subconscious needs to hear. This isn't just a performance. It's a lifestyle now. Step 3. Speak as the identity, even to yourself. No more, I'm trying to. Hopefully I can. I'm working on becoming. Start using, this is who I am now. That's not my signal anymore. I don't do that version of me anymore. This language builds self-congruence. You're telling your system, this isn't a goal. This is reality. And the brain listens. Step 4. Return faster. You don't need to avoid falling into old habits. You just need to return to alignment faster each time. That's real mastery. Not avoiding the trigger, recovering your truth before the old story takes hold. The more times you return, the shorter the gap gets. Until eventually, there is no gap. There's just alignment. As default. As identity. As atmosphere. Step 5. Expect resistance and outlive it. You'll have moments of friction. Not because you're broken. Because you're rebuilding. And rebuilding always involves resistance. But resistance only survives on your reaction. If you meet it with panic, it gets stronger. If you meet it with presence, it dissolves. The more calmly you face the moment, the more evidence your system collects that this version of me is real. This isn't a phase. This is who I've become. Over time, the inner echo becomes background noise. Not noise like clutter, noise like rhythm, a steady, constant hum of self-identity that doesn't need to be declared anymore. Because it's how you think, how you choose, how you move. You're not reminding yourself to be aligned. You are thinking from alignment by default. That's the goal, and you're closer than you realize. Next, we'll witness the outer effects of this inner consistency, the moment when reality stops resisting you and instead begins to mirror your internal coherence, confirming that your signal is no longer an experiment. It's your new frequency. You've reinforced the signal. You've built the inner echo. And maybe for the first time, it no longer feels like something you're trying to do. It just feels like you. But here's where everything accelerates. Because once you become consistent in alignment, your external reality begins to reorganize itself. Not by magic, not by luck, but by response. Reality can't help but mirror the frequency it receives. And now that frequency is different. Let's start here. Your life is not just a reflection of your actions. It's a reflection of your dominant internal state. When that state is rooted in conflict, fear, people-pleasing, guilt, or scarcity, the world responds accordingly. You'll notice more confusion, more friction, more of the same problems dressed in different disguises. But when your baseline is clear, the shift is undeniable. Conversations become cleaner. Chaos stops following you. Opportunities align without manipulation. Resistance fades not because everything's easy, but because you're not fighting yourself anymore. This isn't a coincidence. It's cause and effect. You've shifted the emotional and energetic language that your environment reads, so your environment starts speaking back in that new language. Now, let's get specific. What does it actually look like when reality begins responding? You'll start to see 1. Old dynamics fall apart quickly. Relationships built on the old you will either evolve or dissolve. Why? Because your signal no longer validates their pattern. The dynamic collapses. The story breaks. The version of you they once interacted with no longer exists. It's not rejection. It's just resonance finding a new level. 2. Clarity replaces conflict. Things you used to agonize over, conversations, decisions, boundaries, begin to resolve without drama. Not because other people changed, because your internal charge is gone. You're not broadcasting tension. You're not inviting chaos. So reality no longer echoes it. 3. Your timing becomes uncanny. You start to just happen to be in the right place. You say things that land with perfect weight. You take actions that ripple far beyond what logic could predict. This isn't randomness. This is coherence. You've stopped scrambling for control, and now you're in sync with the environment around you. 4. New doors open that you didn't force. Emails arrive. People reach out. Offers show up. Resources appear. You didn't chase them, but your signal now matches them. And like tuning a dial to a new frequency, they're suddenly audible. You don't have to perform to receive. You just need to be consistent in the truth of who you are. 5. Life becomes quieter but deeper. You no longer seek the highs to compensate for the lows. You stop craving the adrenaline of the next fix. You feel calm in moments that used to provoke you, because life is no longer a stage to survive. It's a mirror, and now the reflection isn't distorted. But here's the key to sustaining this. Don't rush to interpret everything as a test. If something uncomfortable happens, don't assume your signal is broken. Sometimes life sends contrast not to punish, but to clarify. Do you still choose alignment here? Will you stay centered now? These are invitations, not detours. And the more calmly you walk through them, the more reality aligns in your favor. You're not trying to make things happen anymore. You're holding a signal that lets things arrive. Next, we'll explore what it means to stop being the effect of your circumstances and start being the cause. Because you've been responding to life long enough. Now it's time to become the one who sets the tone. Up until now, most of your life has likely been spent in response mode. You respond to people, to pressure, to expectations, to past wounds, to future fears. Even your growth, your so-called breakthroughs, may have been responses to discomfort. And while that brought you here, it's not where your evolution ends. Because now, something new becomes possible. You become the cause of your experience. Not through control, through signal. Let's be clear. Being the cause doesn't mean you control every outcome. It means you decide the frequency, and everything that enters your life has to meet you there or fall away. It means your choices are not reactions to chaos. They're initiations of clarity. It means you stop waiting for proof and start leading with alignment. That's power. Not in the way the world defines it, but in the way your soul recognizes it. Stable, clean, unapologetic, rooted. This is what it feels like when you shift from survival into creative authority. You don't ask, will they like this version of me? Can I say this without being misunderstood? Is this the safest move? You ask, is this aligned? Does this honor the version of me I've chosen? Is this an expression of my actual signal? That shift, it rewrites your life from the inside out. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of becoming the cause. It begins with one powerful choice: to act from signal, not circumstance. When your circumstances try to dictate your emotional state, you pause. You ask, what would I do right now if I were broadcasting from truth, not reacting to fear? And then you move from that, even if it's small, even if it's silent, even if no one claps. That's the act of causation. You stop playing emotional tennis with the external world. You stop waiting to see how others feel before deciding how you'll feel. You stop making your alignment conditional on someone else's behavior. You stop being pulled and you start originating. That changes everything. Let's be practical. Instead of hoping someone respects your time, you respect it first. Instead of waiting to be chosen, you embody your worth so clearly that choice becomes irrelevant. Instead of micromanaging how you're perceived, you trust that your alignment speaks louder than your performance. Because it does. It always has. You just hadn't felt safe enough to trust it until now. But now you know what happens when you do. Reality doesn't just respond. It reorganizes. It adapts to the tone you set. Because alignment isn't passive. It's magnetic. Tells the room, the moment, the conversation, the opportunity. This is where we're operating from. Meet me here or not at all. This is how you become the cause. Not by force, by frequency, by deciding that your internal state is the origin, not a reaction to someone else's chaos. And the longer you live this way, the more everything else has no choice but to follow. Next, we'll unlock something vital: how to keep your signal clear and flowing, so that even when life gets busy, intense, or unpredictable, you never fall back into the clogged, blocked version of yourself. You're no longer becoming the signal. You are the signal. Let's keep it flowing. You've stepped into your role as the cause. You're no longer reacting. You're initiating. You're living from signal, not circumstance. But to sustain this, you must address the final piece most people overlook: blockage. Even the most aligned mind can become congested. Not because it's broken, but because clarity is a flow state. And any flow state, when left unmanaged, can get obstructed. Not by trauma this time, but by accumulated noise. You've evolved beyond the big loops. But now you must monitor the subtler ones. The low-grade overthinking, the mental clutter, the background static of unspoken pressure. That's what blocks the pipeline. That's what chokes the signal. Not dysfunction, just unacknowledged mental residue. Here's what this looks like. You're clear on your next step, then you overanalyze. You know what's aligned, then you hesitate. You've upgraded your internal script, but then you subtly revert when too much emotion builds. It's not sabotage. It's not regression. It's simply congestion in the thought pipeline. And if you don't clear it regularly, the signal that once flowed freely becomes fuzzy again. Here's how to keep it open. Step 1. Daily conscious download. Every day, take 5 minutes to write. What thoughts are circling? What emotions feel unprocessed? What questions are lingering in the background? Not to solve them, just to empty them out. This gives your mind a place to release the pressure instead of storing it unconsciously. Step 2. Emotional check-ins without language. Not everything that blocks you needs to be understood. Some of it just needs to be felt. Set a timer. Sit still. Drop into the body. Ask, what's here right now that I haven't allowed myself to fully feel? Don't narrate it. Don't fix it. Just feel it until the tension dissipates. The pipeline clears through sensation, not explanation. Step 3. Detect invisible obligations. So much mental congestion comes from unconscious agreements you didn't know you were keeping. You think, I have to respond right away. I should be more productive. I owe people updates. I can't let anyone down. None of these are truth. They're silent contracts. Tear them up. Write them down. Cross them out. Say out loud, this is no longer mine to carry. Every time you do, you create more space for authentic thought to flow in. Step 4. Reclaim your stillness. The mind doesn't need to always be stimulated. In fact, your most aligned insights come in silence. So give yourself more time without input. No podcasts, no scrolling, no background content. Stillness isn't lack. It's signal amplification. The thought you haven't heard yet is waiting for silence. Step 5. Ask this question every day. Is the version of me I've become getting enough oxygen? Because even growth gets blocked if you don't give it space to breathe. You're not just managing thoughts anymore. You're maintaining a channel between who you are and who you're becoming. Keep it clear. Keep it open. Keep it sacred. Next, we'll explore the paradox that unlocks this flow state completely, why control kills clarity, and how letting go gives you the power control could never offer. You've done the work. You've rewired the loops. You've stabilized your signal. You've cleared the mental noise. But there's still one pattern that, if left unexamined, will bring the old system back faster than anything else. Control. Even in healing, control sneaks in. I need to think the right thought. I need to feel the right way. I need to make sure I don't mess this up. I need to monitor every move so I don't slip. But here's the irony. That need to monitor, manage, control, that's what causes the misalignment. Control is the ego's last defense. It dresses up like responsibility. It wears the mask of discipline. It says, I'm just staying focused. But really, it's the voice of fear in disguise. Fear that if you don't grip tightly enough, things will fall apart. But they don't. They only fall apart when you hold them too tightly. So here's the truth you're ready to embody. The signal doesn't need to be forced. It wants to flow. Your job is no longer to control the outcome. It's to stay available to the signal and move from there. Let's get practical. What does surrender actually look like? 1. You release the timeline. You stop trying to speed up your evolution. You stop checking the mirror for progress every day. You start trusting that the version of you you're becoming doesn't operate on urgency. She doesn't rush. He doesn't need to be done. They know truth unfolds on time. 2. You stop explaining your alignment. You no longer feel the need to justify your boundaries. You don't overclarify your silence. You don't defend your decisions. You let people respond however they will, and you stay grounded anyway, because your signal is no longer up for debate. 3. You trust you're being more than you're doing. You stop thinking, what do I need to fix? You start asking, what energy am I radiating right now? You realize that presence changes more than planning ever could. And the world starts responding not to your output, but to your authenticity. 4. You let emotions pass through without grabbing them. Surrender doesn't mean no feeling. It means you don't become the feeling. You observe the emotion without clinging to it. You let fear move without asking it to leave instantly. You trust that if you don't resist it, it will dissolve. And in its place, peace arises naturally, not because you chased it, but because you allowed it. 5. You stop measuring everything. Control loves metrics. How well did I do today? Was I aligned enough? Did I say the right thing? You let that go. You let life be incomplete sometimes. Because now you know wholeness isn't perfection. It's presence. Here's the paradox you now get to live. When you stop controlling, things begin to align. Not because you're inactive, but because you're finally available to move in flow, not force. The old self ran on effort. The self moves on signal. And signal doesn't need pressure. It just needs presence. You've done enough. Now let it work through you. Let alignment do the heavy lifting. Let your life reflect back the trust you've built within. Next, we'll meet the version of you that's always been there, underneath the programming, the control, and the noise. Not a better version. Not a future self. Just the real you, who's been waiting this whole time to be remembered. You've stopped forcing. You've stopped managing. You've stopped reacting. And now something remarkable is happening. The noise is gone. And beneath it, there's someone you almost forgot existed. Not a new identity. Not a future self. Not an upgraded version of who you were. Someone older than all of that. Someone truer. This is what most people don't understand about transformation. You're not creating a better version of yourself. You're excavating the original. The one that got buried beneath coping strategies, hiding mechanisms, survival logic, inherited scripts. That self was never gone. It was just waiting, quietly, patiently, beneath the performance you thought you had to maintain to survive. So let's talk about who the self is. The real self isn't perfect, but it's whole. It doesn't fear visibility. It doesn't collapse in rejection. It doesn't over-explain, apologize, or pretend. It tells the truth. It breathes without guilt. It rests without earning. Says no without explanation. Says yes without justification. It's not concerned with how it's perceived, because it knows who it is. You've caught glimpses of this self before, in moments of presence, in flashes of clarity, in silence, when your mind wasn't scrambling to manage the narrative. Now, you don't just glimpse it, you live from it. And it feels like this: ease even in uncertainty, stillness even in movement, clarity even when things don't go as planned, boundaries without effort, expression without performance. This is not a mindset. It's your natural state reclaimed. Here's what you'll notice as this self emerges. 1. Old definitions no longer fit. You're not who you were in that relationship. You're not who you were in that identity. You're not who you were when you started this journey. The language that once defined you now feels like a costume. And you stop trying to explain that to anyone. You just move differently. 2. Time starts to slow down. You no longer race. You no longer chase. You no longer fill space just to feel productive. Because urgency isn't driving anymore. Presence is. And presence doesn't need to rush. 3. Your desires become simpler and more potent. You don't want attention. You want resonance. You don't want more. You want real. You don't want noise. You want connection. The pull toward what's true becomes magnetic. And the false? It starts to dissolve on its own. For you feel calm, not numb, not disassociated, not detached, just calm. Like the war inside you finally ended. Like you no longer have to audition for your own life. Like you're home in your body, your mind, your energy. This is what it feels like when the real self returns. Not with fanfare, with certainty. A soft, steady knowing. I was never gone, just waiting for the noise to fade. But here's the most beautiful part. This self was never separate from you. You didn't have to invent it. You didn't have to earn it. You just had to clear the fog. And now, you get to live from this place every day. Not occasionally. Not during breakthroughs. As a baseline. Next, we explore what life looks like when that old thought, the one that distorted your reality, is truly gone. No more echoes. No more tension. Just clean perception. From a self that no longer filters life through fear. For most of your life, there's been a background frequency. A whisper of doubt. A silent command. A low-grade fear or story that kept running no matter how much progress you made. You didn't always hear it clearly, but you felt it. In hesitation. in guilt, in second-guessing, in the way you filtered every opportunity through what if I fail? What if they judge me? What if I'm not enough? That thought, the one you weren't even thinking consciously, shaped everything. It was the invisible architect behind how you moved, spoke, loved, worked, rested, and dreamed. Now, that thought is gone. Let that land. You're no longer living under a distorted lens. Your reality is no longer colored by a script you didn't write. Your behavior is no longer a compensation for an unprocessed fear. You're living without the old thought, and the difference is undeniable. Here's what it feels like. 1. Peace becomes normal. Not boring. Not quiet. Just stable. You're not scanning for the next threat. You're not internally bracing for the drop. You're not translating every experience through a trauma-shaped filter. You're simply here, with nothing to prove, fix, or perform. 2. Silence is safe. You don't need constant input. You're not avoiding inner space. You don't fear stillness, because your mind isn't waiting for the next spike of adrenaline. It's resting in clarity. 3. You stop bracing. You're not emotionally armored anymore. You don't walk into rooms wondering how to shrink or shapeshift. You enter as you are, and let the world respond however it wants without internal compromise. 4. You create from inspiration, not escape. Before, your output was often a distraction. Work, creation, action, they all serve to escape a version of yourself you couldn't sit with. Now, you create because you want to, because it's an overflow of clarity, not a cover for self-doubt. 5. You notice beauty again, because your perception isn't filtered through survival anymore. You're not looking for what's wrong. You're seeing what's true, and truth has always been beautiful. You just couldn't see it while trying to stay safe. This is what happens when the old thought, the one you didn't even know was hijacking your experience, finally loses its grip. Not because you argued with it, but because it's irrelevant now. It doesn't match your frequency anymore. You've stopped rehearsing failure. You've stopped apologizing for your needs. You've stopped carrying guilt like a badge of honor. You're just living, clean, clear, present. And that's not accidental. It's the result of a signal you chose again and again until it became who you are. And now, there's space. Space for joy without fear. Space for rest without shame. Space for expression without second-guessing. You're not watching your life from behind a tinted window anymore. You're in it, fully. Next, we unlock the most powerful faculty you now have access to, because with the distortion gone, your intuition returns, and with it, the ability to live by your inner knowing with full conviction. The noise is gone. The old thought has lost its grip. And for the first time in a long time, there's room. Room for something that's been waiting to return. Not from outside you. Not from someone else's model or framework. But from deep inside. Always present. Just quieted. Your intuition. You didn't lose it. You just couldn't hear it. Because intuition doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. It doesn't override chaos. It speaks after the drama. Beneath the fear. Inside the stillness. And now that you're still, it's back. Let's be precise. Intuition isn't your emotion. It isn't your logic. It isn't your gut reaction. It's the knowing that appears before interpretation. Not reactive. Not protective. Not defensive. Clear. Simple. Non-negotiable. Here's how you know you're hearing intuition. It's quiet, but unmistakable. It comes without story or justification. It doesn't argue. It just states. It doesn't fear consequence. It honors alignment. And the moment you follow it, your system relaxes, even if the path it points to feels uncertain. Because alignment isn't comfort. It's rightness. Let's talk about why intuition felt absent for so long. It wasn't gone. It was buried. Under overthinking. Under self-doubt. Under all the learned behavior that said, you can't trust yourself. When you grew up being told to override your instincts. When you were taught to please before you speak. When your pain trained you to predict threats before you act. You muted intuition, not on purpose, but as survival. Now, survival isn't running the show anymore, which means you no longer need approval to move. You don't need evidence to choose. You don't need consensus to feel safe. So intuition can speak again, not as magic, as baseline. You'll notice it in the smallest decisions. A no that rises before logic kicks in. A yes that makes no sense on paper but feels unshakably true. A subtle tug toward a conversation, a project, a place. You won't always have proof, but you'll feel clarity. Not in the form of certainty, but in the absence of conflict. That's how intuition moves. Not with force, but with peace. You'll also notice you stop outsourcing. You don't ask 10 people for advice. You don't wait for signs every time you face a choice. You don't need to think something through for hours. You feel the signal. You honor the pull. You trust the step. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. And when you do this enough, intuition becomes louder than fear, faster than logic, more reliable than memory. It becomes your internal GPS, guiding you not toward what's familiar, but toward what's aligned. Now, here's the most important part. You don't wait for intuition to prove itself. You act on it, because acting on it is what makes it sharper. The more you follow the subtle pull, the more clearly you hear it next time. This is how you build self-trust that no external voice can shake. Next, we unlock what happens when intuition becomes your creative engine, when what you produce, shape, or contribute comes not from strategy, but from the clean signal of your deepest knowing. The world tells you to create from strategy, from market demand, from attention, from hustle, from scarcity, from comparison. But now, you've found something different. You're no longer creating from pressure. You're creating from signal. This signal doesn't come from urgency. It doesn't come from fear of being left behind. It doesn't come from needing to prove anything. It comes from something simpler, something quieter. It comes from alignment, from the thought you never thought now made clear, from the voice that doesn't need volume to be heard, from the self that doesn't need applause to move. Let's break it down. Creating from pure signal means you express from truth, not trend. You make from resonance, not reaction. You speak from knowing, not needing. Or you move because something wants to come through, not because something needs to be built for validation. It's not passive. It's powerful. There's no friction here. You're not trying to beat the algorithm. You're not chasing visibility. You're not competing for space. You're opening a channel and letting life flow through you. That's what true creation is. Not output, transmission. It's not something you push. It's something you allow. You're not trying to craft the perfect message. You're broadcasting a frequency that only you carry. When you create from this place, people feel it. They don't just hear your words. They feel your clarity. They respond to your energy. They may not be able to name it, but they trust it. Because you're not performing anymore. You're transmitting something real. Here's the shift. Before, you used creation to become someone. Now, you use creation to reveal someone, the version of you that's always been here. Creation isn't compensation. It's congruence. You don't worry about being misunderstood. Because you're not chasing comprehension. You're offering truth. And truth isn't fragile. It doesn't require defense. It just requires clarity and courage. You don't delay expression waiting for perfection. You let it out as it wants to come through. Raw, clear, aligned. Because signal doesn't need polish to resonate. It needs presence. You stop asking, will this get enough attention? Will they like this version of me? Will this be good enough? And you start asking, is this what wants to be spoken? Is this mine to carry? Is this aligned with what I now know is true? That's the shift from force to flow. And yes, the results look different too. You may reach fewer people, but those you do, they feel it, because the energy is clean, and clean energy cuts through noise without shouting. This is when creating feels like exhaling. You're not grinding, you're not scripting, you're not engineering virality. You're expressing, You're offering. You're living your truth out loud. And your life begins to reflect that signal in return. More aligned opportunities, clearer conversations, effortless connections, unexpected resonance. Not because you hustled for it, because you aligned with it and allowed it to find you. Next, we'll bring this full circle. You've found the signal. You've spoken from it. Now you become it. Not in moments, not through effort, but as a walking embodiment of the thought you couldn't think before until now. There was a moment long ago when the thought first tried to surface. It was quiet, subtle, almost dismissible. It didn't match the pattern. It didn't match your story. It didn't match the expectations you'd inherited. So it got pushed away, because it felt too big, too bold, too free. It didn't fit inside the system you were trained to survive in. And so that thought, the true one, stayed dormant, waiting for the noise to clear, waiting for the identity to soften, waiting for you to return. Now here we are. The thought you couldn't think before isn't just thinkable, it's you. This chapter isn't about knowing, it's about being. The moment you stop holding a belief, and the belief starts holding you, you're no longer practicing, you're no longer refining, you're no longer figuring out how to stay in alignment. You are alignment. There is no gap now, between what you know and how you move, between what you feel and how you speak, between what you are and what you express. This is what it means to become the thought you couldn't think before. Not just to understand it, to embody it fully. Here's how you know you're there. 1. You move without asking for permission. Not because you're rebellious, because you've remembered that no one else can authorize your truth. 2. You stop introducing your worth. You don't need to explain your value before entering a room. You don't qualify your voice. You don't pitch your being. You exist. And that's enough. 3. You stop waiting to be chosen. You don't look for signs of acceptance. You don't need invitations to claim your place. Because this signal, the one you're now living from, doesn't request permission. It radiates. You don't announce this shift. You carry it. In your posture, in your presence, in the silence between your words. And people feel it even if they can't name what changed. That's the power of embodied signal. It doesn't just impact what you do. It restructures what you allow. You start noticing what doesn't match your frequency and releasing it with zero drama. No analysis, no resistance, just clarity. Because when you become the thought, the frequency becomes your filter. Anything misaligned dissolves. Anything authentic accelerates. You don't need intensity to feel alive. You don't need tension to feel real. You don't need conflict to feel connected. You are your own confirmation now. And that's not arrogance. That's alignment. You've spent most of your life chasing a feeling that was never outside of you. And now that you've stopped chasing, you've discovered the secret. It was always waiting in the space beneath effort. The thought you couldn't think wasn't inaccessible. It was just blocked by the version of you who thought you weren't ready. Now you are. Now you're it. Next, we explore what happens when others feel this thought. Not because you say it, but because you are it. When your presence becomes the unseen force that realigns rooms, calms chaos, and reshapes everything around you. Look back, just for a moment. There was a time when you were trying to find the signal. You wanted to uncover the hidden force shaping your mind. You wanted to name it, tame it, control it. You were trying to understand what had been shaping your life without your consent. And now, you've stopped looking for the signal, because you've become it. Your energy is no longer confused. Your thoughts are no longer split. Your presence is no longer scattered. You walk into a space and things change, not because you demand it, because your clarity invites recalibration. People adjust to your pace. They listen differently. They hesitate before projecting. They find themselves breathing easier, and they don't even know why. It's because your signal is clean. You're not leaking contradiction anymore. You're transmitting coherence. This isn't power in the conventional sense. It's not dominance. It's not influence. It's not attention. It's the quiet power of integrity, where your inner world matches your outer expression so precisely, it creates harmony by default. This is how you know you've become the new invisible signal. 1. People open around you. Not because you try to be safe, but because your alignment radiates permission. 2. You magnetize clarity. Conversations get to the point. Decisions become obvious. The fog clears because you're not generating it anymore. 3. You polarize without apology. Some people lean in. Some people fall away. You let them, because this isn't about keeping everyone comfortable. It's about keeping you coherent. The more consistently you hold this signal, the more everything in your life begins to orbit it. Or relationships evolve to meet it. Opportunities respond to it. Environments adapt to it. Reality reorders itself around it. Not because you're imposing anything, but because everything wants to harmonize with truth. And when you carry it, truth becomes the gravity that draws alignment toward you. You don't speak as much now, because your signal does most of the communicating. You don't correct people's projections. You don't defend your boundaries. You don't chase understanding. You are the broadcast, and your clarity is louder than words. This is the new invisible force. It's not a hidden script manipulating you. It's not a broken loop running you. It's not a trauma filter distorting your view. It's you, conscious, unshaken, consistent. The signal that once controlled you has been replaced by the truth you now carry in every thought, word, and movement. You've become the presence you used to reach for, the source you thought was missing, the guide you thought you needed to find, and others feel it not as a performance but as a frequency of home. Here's what happens next. Your presence becomes a mirror, not one that reflects people's stories, but one that reflects their potential. When they're near you, they remember who they are beneath the mask, what they are beneath the noise, what's possible without the old thought. You don't have to teach this. You don't have to explain it. You just have to be it. You've become the invisible signal now, and it's stronger than logic, more persuasive than charisma, more powerful than control. It's truth fully integrated. You don't have to convince anyone. You just carry it, and that's enough to change everything. Next, we arrive at the final chapter, where we discover what life feels like when you're no longer trapped in someone else's thought, but fully alive inside your own. There's a moment you didn't know you were moving toward. Not a breakthrough, not a climax, not some dramatic epiphany, just a pause, a quiet breath, where you notice something's missing. And at first, you can't quite name it. But it's this: you're no longer carrying the old thought. The loop is quiet. The noise is gone. The constant second-guessing has stopped. Not because you suppressed it, because you've outgrown it. And suddenly, the air is different. Lighter, clearer. Still, this is what it feels like to have a mind that's finally your own. You don't need to rehearse your confidence. It just shows up steady and unannounced. You don't scan conversations looking for subtext. You hear what's said and trust yourself to respond or not. You don't reread every message. You don't apologize for taking up space. You don't wonder whether you're too much or not enough. You're just here, fully. This is the part no one explains. When the thought you didn't know was running your life finally fades, what's left isn't some hyper-optimized version of you. It's someone simpler, someone calmer, someone free. You wake up, and your first feeling isn't dread. You walk into the room, and your body doesn't brace. You make decisions, and your gut doesn't wait for permission. You trust yourself, not because you've proven anything, because your signal is stable. You're not fighting to be seen anymore. You're not shrinking to be accepted. You're not contorting to match the moment. You've stopped wearing mental armor. And strangely, the less you protect yourself, the safer you feel. Because safety was never the absence of danger. It was the absence of internal war. You used to manage perception. Now you manage presence. You used to edit your personality in real time. Now you don't even think about it. You used to try to think better thoughts. Now your mind runs clean, because the architect has changed. The source of your thoughts isn't fear anymore. It's truth. Your preferences are real now. Your pace is real. Your voice is real. Even your silences feel more true than your old performances, because none of it is filtered anymore. You're not working on yourself. You're living as yourself. And here's what that changes. 1. You stop measuring your worth by your output. You create when inspired. You rest without guilt. You listen to your body, not the clock. Productivity becomes a side effect of alignment, not a metric of value. 2. You stop fearing the unknown, because your relationship with control has healed. You don't need every answer up front. You don't need to prepare for every emotional scenario. You trust that the version of you who arrives in that moment will know exactly what to do. 3. You stop replaying your past, not because you've forgotten it, because you're no longer trying to survive it. You've made peace with the paths that shaped you, even the broken ones. They were necessary, but they're no longer now. You've stopped trying to escape yourself, because there's nothing left to outrun. Just stillness, just clarity, just this version of you, the one that feels like home. People sense the difference. They don't always know what changed, but they notice how they feel around you. They mirror your calm. They speak with more care. They reveal more of themselves, because your coherence makes it safe to drop the mask. And when chaos arises, because it still will, your reaction changes too. You don't spiral. You don't collapse. You don't regress. You pause. You listen. And you choose. From center. From signal. From a mind that no longer mistakes panic for power. The world didn't change. You did. You stopped negotiating your clarity. You stopped outsourcing your direction. You stopped distorting yourself to fit a thought that was never yours. Now, you live with a kind of lightness that doesn't need explanation. Not happiness as performance, but peace as presence. The weight is gone, and in its place, space. Space to imagine, space to feel, space to love without gripping, to create without overthinking, to exist without earning it. That's what freedom really is. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of distortion. When nothing inside you is pretending. When every thought you think feels true. When the voice in your head finally sounds like you, not a wounded version of you. Not a cautious echo of the past. Just you. So here's where we end. You thought this was a journey of improvement. It wasn't. It was a return to the mind that was always yours, just waiting beneath the noise. To the self that was never broken, just buried beneath the script. To the thought you weren't allowed to think until now. You don't need the signal anymore, because you've become it. And the moment you feel yourself slipping, you'll know exactly where to return. Not to a process, to your baseline. You've uncovered it. You've lived it. And now, you are it. A mind unchained. Welcome home.